I still remember the night I first set foot in Maplewood. Even now, years later, the memory sits heavy in my chest, like a stone I can't shake. It wasn't a big town, just another quiet suburb where nothing ever really happened. Houses lined up like obedient soldiers, lawns trimmed neat, curtains drawn tight. And yet, that night, something felt off. I was new to the force, fresh out of the academy, still trying to figure out what it meant to be a sheriff rather than just a kid in a uniform. I'd only been assigned to the county a few weeks, and my patrols had mostly been routine. Stray dogs, late-night noise complaints, the occasional drunk who'd stumbled out of a bar. But that night, I got a call that promised nothing routine at all. The dispatcher's voice crackled in my earpiece, low and tense. "Sheriff, you might want to check the Henderson place. Neighbors report they haven't seen the family in days. House looks empty." Empty. That word stuck in my mind like a splinter. I drove down the street slowly, headlights cutting through fog that had rolled in from the river. The kind of fog that makes shadows look thicker, makes every ordinary street lamp feel like a warning. The Henderson house sat at the end of Maplewood Lane. A two-story colonial with peeling white paint, shutters faded to gray. From the outside, it looked untouched, almost normal, except for a single detail that made my stomach twist. The mailbox was open, the flag down, no letters, no newspapers, nothing. Like the world had forgotten it existed. I parked a few houses down. There's a rule in situations like this. Take it slow. Observe. Don't announce yourself. So I did. I walked up the driveway, boots crunching over the gravel. The front door was unlocked. A small detail that should have been comforting, but wasn't. Instead, it pressed on me, like the house itself was watching, waiting. Inside, the air was stale. Thick, heavy, like the house had been holding its breath. The lights were off, and only the faint glow of the street lamp outside spilled through the windows, painting long, crooked shadows across the walls. I called out, "Hello? Sheriff's office. Is anyone here?" My voice sounded absurdly loud and quiet, bouncing off the walls, swallowed by the rooms. There was no answer, not a whisper, not even the creak of settling wood. Just the faint hum of the heater, probably still running on some old thermostat setting. I moved through the house slowly, each step careful, each corner checked. The living room was the first thing that hit me. Nothing seemed wrong at first glance. A couch, a coffee table, the family photos on the wall, a smiling father, a mother with her arm around a little girl, all posed perfectly for the camera. But the photos were dusty, a layer of neglect, thick enough that it had muted the colors. The dust told me something the empty rooms didn't yet. Nobody had been here for weeks, maybe longer. I checked the kitchen. Dishes in the sink, rotting. Milk spilled in the fridge, mold crawling across the shelves. The scent of decay was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I could feel it in my nose. My stomach churned. Whoever had lived here left everything behind, like they'd vanished into thin air. Then I heard it, soft at first. A creak, not from me, not from my boots. Somewhere above, in the hallway of the second floor. I froze, listening. The house didn't make creaks like that. Not this one. This one sounded deliberate, like a footstep. I called out again, my voice tighter this time. "This is the sheriff. If anyone's here, I need you to respond." Nothing. I forced myself up the stairs, each step groaning under my weight. My flashlight cut swaths of light into the darkness, swinging across walls lined with more photos. Kids' artwork taped crookedly above a radiator. A calendar, last marked in June. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, and yet I felt it, that same feeling I'd had outside. Eyes on me, watching, judging, waiting. The master bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it gently. The bed was made, sheets tucked perfectly, like someone had been fastidious in their absence. On the nightstand, a glass of water sat untouched, a layer of dust just beginning to gather. I touched it, cold, undisturbed. I started looking for clues. Papers, notes, anything that explained why an entire family could vanish without a trace. And then I noticed something that made my heart skip. The closet. It was closed, but the door had scratches along the edges. Thin, frantic scratches, like someone had clawed at it from inside. I reached for the handle, hesitated, my hand shaking. My mind tried to argue, rationalize. Maybe it was an animal, raccoon, cat, anything, but the scratches didn't make sense. They were human, long, deliberate, full of desperation. I opened the closet slowly. Inside, the darkness felt heavier, like it swallowed the light from my flashlight. Nothing was there, just a faint smell of mildew and something else. Iron. Blood? I couldn't tell. I didn't stay to investigate further. I stepped back, heart hammering. My first instinct was to leave. Call it in. Get backup. But a part of me, a part I've always had, the part that drives me into danger instead of away from it, wanted to know. I moved down the hall, checking the children's room. Empty. Toys scattered, but untouched for weeks, maybe months. A teddy bear lay on the floor, its fur matted, eyes dull. And then I heard it again. That sound. Soft, almost like a whisper. From the attic this time. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I aimed it at the ceiling hatch. I swear I could see it move. Something shifting above me. Waiting. I don't know why I didn't leave then. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was arrogance. Or maybe it was the part of me that would never let go of a case until it had answers. I opened the attic door. The stairs groaned under me, louder than I expected, echoing through the empty house. The attic was empty. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight. Old furniture, boxes, nothing that explained anything. And yet, I couldn't shake it. That feeling, stronger now, like the house itself was breathing around me. I felt eyes, dozens of them, on my back. I spun around. Nothing. Just shadows. Just silence. I remember standing there for what felt like hours. Heart racing. Mind spinning. The house was empty. And yet I felt trapped. Like it had a will of its own. And I was the intruder. And then, just as I was about to leave, I saw it. A small, hand-drawn picture, tucked between two boxes. A family. But they weren't smiling this time. Their eyes empty. Hollow black circles where eyes should be. And in the corner, in careful, childish letters, it said, "Don't follow us." I left the house that night. I locked the door behind me, drove back to the station, and didn't sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that house. Empty, watching, waiting. And that picture, the warning. I don't know what happened to the Hendersons. No trace was ever found. No evidence, no bodies, nothing. Just a house that stands at the end of Maplewood Lane. Still white, still peeling, still silent. And every time I pass it, I feel the same thing I felt that night. Eyes, watching, waiting. I don't know if I'll ever forget that night. The first time I realized that some disappearances don't leave clues. That some houses keep their secrets forever. That some families vanish and the world never notices. I was new then, young, naive. I thought I understood fear. But fear is different when it's patient, when it doesn't shout or crash or scream. Fear that lingers, that waits in the shadows of suburban home, is a kind of horror you never shake. Maplewood taught me that, and I will carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life. After that night at the Henderson house, I couldn't stop thinking about the family, or what had happened to them. The empty rooms, the dust, the scratches, it gnawed at me. Sleep was shallow. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the house, dark and silent, watching me back. I had to know more. The neighbors hadn't seen anyone coming or going. But one thing they mentioned, almost as an afterthought, was the woods behind the Henderson property. They said the trees were thick, unwelcoming, and strange noises came from there at night. I thought maybe they were just imagining things. But I knew better. Quiet towns have quiet lies, and sometimes the truth hides where you least expect it. I waited until the next day. Sunlight made the world seem safer, but the shadows in the woods were already waiting. I drove past the Henderson house, parked at the edge of the tree line, and stepped out. The air was colder than I remembered, damp with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. The trees were tall and close together, their branches tangled like fingers. There was a sound I couldn't place, a whisper, almost inaudible, drifting through the leaves. I took a step forward. Then another. The woods swallowed me in silence. My boots crunched over broken twigs and dry leaves. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just the wind, just my imagination. But something about these woods felt deliberate, like they had been waiting for me. I found the first clue near the underbrush, a small footprint, barefoot, pressed into the mud, leading deeper into the trees. It was tiny, too small for an adult, too precise for an animal, and beside it, scratched into the bark of a tree, were letters. Not words, just symbols, jagged, frantic, almost like someone had been terrified while carving them. I ran my fingers over bark, but the grooves were cold, older than I thought. The further I went, the more signs I found. Twigs arranged in patterns like someone or something had been counting steps, marking trails. A torn piece of fabric caught on a bush, faded and stiff with dirt. A small shoe, child-size, half buried in the mud. I picked it up. Light, fragile. I held it against my chest. I didn't realize I was whispering, "Where are you?" until the words left my mouth. The whispers grew louder, but still soft, curling around me like smoke. I stopped, strained to listen. They weren't coming from any one direction. They weren't the wind. They were words, almost syllables, broken and incomplete. A voice, maybe, or many voices, just beyond understanding. I kept walking, heart thumping, flashlight out even though it was daytime. Sunlight filtered weakly through the dense canopy, but shadows clung stubbornly to every tree. The forest floor was uneven, roots rising like ribs, fallen logs forming jagged bridges over muddy gullies. Every sound, the snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, felt amplified. Someone was here, watching, waiting. Then I saw it, a circle of stones, small and crude, arranged around a tree. At the center, the dirt was freshly disturbed. Something had been buried, or maybe dug up. I knelt down, hands shaking, but the earth was soft and warm, like it had just been moved. I felt a cold prick of fear in my chest. Whoever had been here wasn't gone long. I followed a narrow path that twisted back toward the edge of the woods, and that's when I saw it. Something at the corner of my vision, moving too smoothly for a person, too deliberate for a deer. I spun. Nothing. Just trees, just shadows. My chest tightened. I kept moving, faster now, adrenaline pushing me forward, but a part of me wished I would stop. A part of me wanted to turn back and never look. The path led me to a small clearing. The sunlight barely reached it. In the center, a tree was different from the rest. Its bark was darker, almost black, and its branches hung low, like it was bowing. Scratches covered it, deeper and more frantic than any I had seen before. And beneath the scratches, I saw more symbols, carved neatly this time, repeated over and over. I traced the carvings with my flashlight. They weren't words I could read, not in any language I knew, but the meaning was clear. Fear, warning, desperation. Something had been trapped here. Something had screamed in silence. I dropped my flashlight for a second, overwhelmed. My chest heaved. Sweat ran down my back. Though the air was cold, I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. But the curiosity that had brought me here pushed me on. Something, or someone, was leaving a trail. Someone wanted me to see. I followed the trail further. Twisted branches scraped my arms. Thorns tore at my jacket. And then I saw it. A figure, distant, blurred, standing among the trees. My breath caught. I froze. The figure didn't move. Didn't even blink. Just watched. And then, slowly, it vanished. Not like it ran. Not like it turned. It was gone, as if the forest had swallowed it whole. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over a root. My flashlight caught something else. Another piece of clothing, smaller this time, tucked in a hollow tree. A scarf, tiny, faded, smelling faintly of earth and something else I couldn't name. I pressed it to my face. It smelled of someone who had been here, alive, not long ago. I turned to leave. The sun was lower now. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the forest floor. Every tree seemed alive, leaning toward me, whispering. I could hear voices clearly now, but still not words. A chorus of breaths, sighs, quiet sobs, like the forest itself had been holding something for years, and it wanted me to hear. I ran then, my boots pounding the dirt, my lungs burning, my heart hammering like a drum. Branches whipped my face, roots tore at my shoes. The whispers followed, curling around me, never letting me forget what I had seen. When I reached the edge of the woods, sunlight hit me like a slap, and the voices stopped. Silence returned, heavy and oppressive, but safer somehow. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was in my truck, doors locked, hands shaking, flashlight still clutched in my lap. I turned the key in the ignition, but I didn't drive. I just sat, listening to the engine hum, trying to steady my breathing. The forest lay behind me, dark and patient, watching, waiting. Even now, I can't explain what I saw in those woods. A figure, or just shadows playing tricks on a tired mind. The footprints, the symbols, the stones real, I know that. And the whispers, I know I heard them. That day, I realized something I hadn't understood the night at the Henderson house. The house wasn't the only place keeping secrets. The forest knew. The forest had seen. And whatever had taken the Hendersons, it didn't stay in the house. It watched. It followed. And it had left pieces behind. Little breadcrumbs meant to lure someone like me. I've gone back to those woods since. I'll go back again. The feeling of being watched never leaves. Not at home, not at the station, not even in my dreams. Sometimes I wake in the night, feeling a presence, and I swear I can hear the forest whispering through the walls, telling me I'm not alone. I can't explain why I keep looking, why I follow the signs. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's guilt, or maybe it's just a part of me that knows the truth. Some things don't want to be found, but they want to be noticed. And I noticed Maplewood isn't just a town. It's a place that hides in plain sight. The house was only the beginning. The woods, they are patient. They wait, and they remember. It rained that day. Not the light drizzle that makes the streets glisten. Not the gentle sprinkle that soothes. This was relentless, hammering rain, cold and gray, soaking everything in sight. The kind of rain that washes color from the world, leaving it muted, dull, lifeless. I remember staring out the windshield of my cruiser, watching droplets run down the glass like little rivers, wondering how I had let curiosity drag me back to the Henderson property. I'd been here before many times now, but every visit brought something new, something subtle, but impossible to ignore. Today, the storm felt different, heavier, like the weather itself was warning me. My boots hit the wet grass with a squelch as I stepped out, the hood of my jacket doing little to keep the cold from seeping through. The garden was overgrown, weeds clawing up to the flower beds, petals beaten down by the rain. Everything looked forgotten, abandoned, and yet not quite. I moved slowly, scanning the soil, the shrubs, the small, sodden path that led to the back fence. My hand grazed the wet leaves, feeling the slick, sticky texture. And then I saw it, something that made me stop in my tracks. A shoe, one of the Henderson children's shoes, half buried in the mud, soaked through. Mud clung to it, like it was holding on for dear life. I crouched, hands trembling, and pulled it free. Small, delicate, innocent. The sight of it, lying there in the rain, made my chest tighten. Whoever had been here, played, ran, lived, had left it behind. Or worse, had been taken from it. I scanned the garden further, flashlight trembling in my hand, though daylight barely pierced clouds. There were more signs, subtle at first. Tiny footprints pressed into the soft mud, leading toward a back fence, then circling back like someone had wandered in confusion. I followed them slowly, careful not to step in their path. My mind refused to give me relief, turning over every possibility. Maybe the family had tried to leave in a hurry. Maybe someone had chased them. The rain made everything more vivid. The smell of wet earth, the metallic tang of something else I couldn't name, sharp and cold. My flashlight caught a glimmer in the soil near the rose bushes. I leaned closer, squinting. It was a piece of paper, sodden, edges curling, letters barely legible. I picked it up, careful not to tear it. It was a note, or maybe a list. I could barely read it, but few words stabbed into my mind. Don't look. Follow. Safe not. The rest was smudged beyond recognition. Whoever had written it had been in a rush, scared, desperate. And now, sitting in my hand, It felt like a scream pressed into my palm. I kept moving through the garden, flashlight swinging, heart hammering. That's when I noticed the flowers. Lilies crushed, petals scattered in the mud. Some of the stems were bent at odd angles, snapped, as if something had been dragged through the soil. My stomach churned. The image of the family, of children, of someone struggling in the garden, flashed through my mind. I had no proof yet, no bodies, no faces, only signs. But signs spoke if you were willing to listen. And then I saw it, a handprint, not faint, not partial, but clear and desperate, pressed into the clay near the fence. Small, bare, fingers splayed wide. The mud had taken the impression perfectly, as if it had been frozen in time. I pressed my fingers near it, careful, trying to gauge how long it had been there. Too fresh, and yet too washed by the rain to be certain. My mind recoiled, but I couldn't stop. I had to see it. I had to know. The footprints led toward the old shed at the edge of the property. Its paint was peeling, wood soaked and swollen from the rain. I hesitated. Something about that shed had always felt wrong. Shadows clung to it even in the gray daylight, dark lines in the corner where the roof met the walls. I approached slowly, my hand resting on the grip of my flashlight, like it was a lifeline. Inside, the floor was wet, muddy tracks smeared across it, evidence that someone or something had been here recently. And then I noticed more prints. Tiny, irregular, scattered, as if someone had struggled, fought to maintain balance. And in the corner, something caught my eye. A broken toy, a doll, its eyes wide, staring up at me. Mud streaked across its face, one button I'm missing. I crouched. Something about it made my stomach twist. It wasn't just abandoned. It had been dropped or thrown in fear. I stepped back, breathing hard. The rain pounded against the roof of the shed, drowning out almost every other sound. But then I thought I heard something beneath it. A soft scrape, like nails against wood. I froze. Listened. Nothing. Maybe a branch. Maybe my imagination. But that cold twist in my gut told me it wasn't. Someone had been here. Someone small. And they hadn't left willingly. I left the shed and walked back toward the house. Boots squelching, heart still hammering. Rain ran down my collar, my face, dripping into my eyes. The garden looked different now. Alive. In a way that made me uneasy. Flowers bent unnaturally. Mud churned in odd patterns. Like it was marking me, following me, reminding me that the night hadn't ended, that the house, the woods, the garden, they were all connected. Back near the side of the house, I noticed something I'd never seen before. A faint trail of blood, mostly washed away by the rain, but still visible if you look closely. It led from the back door, snaked to the flower beds, and disappeared toward the hedge. My hand shook as I knelt, touched the slick, wet trace. The metallic scent hit me then, unmistakable. Someone had been hurt here. Someone had been afraid. And the garden, innocent as it seemed, had been a witness. I followed the trail carefully, my mind racing. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a whisper. Every puddle reflected shadows that weren't mine. The garden, the flowers, the mud, the rain, they were all evidence. I didn't need more proof. I could feel the story in my bones. At the edge of the property, where the lawn met the thick hedge, I found the last clue, a set of small, muddy footprints leading out into the open field beyond. They stopped abruptly, as if the person who made them had vanished mid-step. No marks beyond the grass. No indication of struggle. Just gone. And then the rain came down harder, washing everything, erasing the path, leaving only the memory of it in my mind. I stood there for a long time, rain drenching me, heart pounding. The evidence was scattered, fragmented, but clear enough. Whoever had lived in that house had left traces of fear, traces of their final moments, all in the garden. And yet, there was no body, no sign of the family themselves. Just small, human pieces left behind to haunt me. I got back to my truck, soaked through, fingers numb, and sat in silence. The rain drummed on the roof, steady, relentless. I kept thinking of that handprint, the footprints, the doll, the torn note, and a part of me knew I hadn't seen the worst. The garden was only one part of the story. Something or someone had been watching, and if the garden held evidence, the house and the woods held answers. Answers I wasn't sure I wanted. I drove away slowly, leaving the rain behind. My uniform was soaked, my boots full of mud, but the images stayed with me, sharper than anything else I'd ever seen. Tiny hands, small footprints, desperate scratches in the dirt, signs of life extinguished or stolen, leaving only echoes for me to chase. That day, the garden whispered its story. Quiet, fragmented, but impossible to ignore. It told me what the house had only hinted at, and what the woods had silently confirmed. Someone had been here, and whatever had taken the Hendersons, they hadn't gone willingly. They had left behind pieces of themselves, as if the rain itself had tried to wash their fear into the soil, into me. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand that garden, its mud, its flowers, its traces of human life. But I know this. It was evidence. Evidence of something terrible, something patient, something that wanted to be remembered, and I will remember. The nightmare started the night after I left the Henderson property. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion, the mind playing tricks after too many hours of rain, mud, and fear. But sleep didn't bring relief. Sleep became a theater, and the house, the garden, the woods, they were all actors performing scenes I couldn't escape. I remember lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the old fan. The fan never made that noise during the day. At night, it sounded like whispers, low, fractured, faint but deliberate. And then the dreams would start, shadows sliding along walls, faces half-formed, mouths open in silent screams, whispers curling around me, in voices I didn't recognize, speaking words I couldn't understand, but somehow I felt their meaning. The first dream was simple, but it left me shaking for hours. I was back at the Henderson house. I walked through the rooms, familiar now but distorted, walls stretched farther than they should, doors that led to nothing, ceilings that loomed. The living room smelled of wet earth and decay. I heard the whispers first, soft, almost pleading, and then I saw the shadows. They weren't human exactly. They were tall, stretched, black shapes that flickered at the edges of my vision. Wherever I turned, they moved, but never approached directly. They watched. I woke drenched in sweat. My heart was pounding like it would break my ribs. The clock read 3:17 a.m. The quiet of the apartment felt too heavy, too still, and somewhere in the shadows, I was sure I heard that same whispering, faint, patient. Days passed, but the nightmares didn't stop. Every time I closed my eyes, the Hendersons were there, or something pretending to be them. I would see glimpses of the little girl in the doll's room, standing in the corner, head tilted, staring with hollow eyes, or the mother, frozen mid-step in the kitchen, hands outstretched as if she had just realized something terrifying. And the whispers, they never left. I could hear them under the hum of my desk at the station, under the low rumble of my patrol truck, even under my own thoughts. I tried to shake it off. I tried to tell myself it was stress, that the rain, the mud, the footprints, the handprints, they were all just work, evidence, but it felt bigger than that. The dreams blurred into reality. I catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows shifting in hallways that should have been empty, doors I was sure I had locked would be slightly ajar, and sometimes, just sometimes, I could swear I heard a child's laugh at a distance, soft, distant, but real. One night, I dreamt I was walking through the woods again. It was the same path I followed, mud squelching under my boots. The rain was there too, though it wasn't falling. It hung in the air, thick, heavy, and then I saw the footprints. Fresh, small, leading deeper into the forest. I followed them, heart hammering. The shadows moved with me, stretching along the trunks, whispering my name. I could feel their gaze on my back, hot, accusing. I came to a clearing, and there they were, the Hendersons, or something like them. Faces blurred, stretched, eyes hollow. They didn't move. They just stood there, waiting, and then I saw their hands, thin, elongated, pointing at me. And I knew, somehow, they weren't asking for help. They were warning. I woke screaming. My sheets were twisted, sweat-soaked. The clock read 2:49 a.m. I lit the lamp, but the shadows in the corners of my room didn't disappear. They just waited, patient, silent, stretching toward me. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, trying to remember if I was awake or still dreaming. The days grew harder. I couldn't focus at work. The whispers followed me there, faint under the hum of fluorescent lights, curling through the walls. I started seeing shadows in empty rooms. In the evidence locker, I swore a box shifted just slightly when no one was near. My hand would brush it, and the shadows would stretch a little more, like the darkness itself was alive, watching. I couldn't stop thinking about the garden, the mud, the handprints, the doll, the footprints. The evidence didn't just speak, it called, and I felt compelled to answer. Every day, I imagined walking back there, following the trail, retracing the steps of the missing. I imagined finding them, or at least knowing what had taken them. But fear rooted me in place. Then, one night, I saw something in the dream that made my stomach twist. I was standing in my apartment, but the walls were translucent. Outside the window, the Henderson house floated in the darkness, suspended, impossible. And there in the yard, the shadows moved freely now, leaving the house entirely. They gathered in the garden, circling the spots where the footprints had been. And I saw the handprint. It wasn't in the mud anymore. It was pressed against the air, as if reaching for me. I woke gasping, shaking so hard I couldn't hold my flashlight. The apartment was silent. The shadows just shadows. But the fear stayed. It settled into my chest, a cold weight, heavier than the mud in the garden. And I realized something I hadn't admitted yet. The evidence wasn't gone. It followed me. The traces of the family's final moments weren't just in the mud, the doll, the footprints. They were in my mind, in the way I saw the world now, in the way shadows shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them. I started leaving notes to myself, recording the dreams, trying to capture them before they slipped away. Names, shapes, whispers, fragments. Each one was more detailed, more vivid. I drew the symbols from the woods, tried to write down the patterns I had seen in the mud. And each night, the nightmares grew longer, the shadows clearer, the whispers louder. I began questioning reality. During the day, the apartment felt too quiet, too still. I'd see movement out the corner of my eye, shadows that shouldn't exist. Doors I was sure I had locked creaked open. Sometimes, I'd hear the whispers while walking down the street, under the hum of passing cars. And I began to wonder, maybe the Hendersons hadn't vanished entirely. Maybe they existed somewhere else now, in a place I couldn't reach, leaving only their echoes behind. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that a man could lose his mind after too many hours in rain-soaked mud and decaying evidence. But then I found myself pausing at intersections, glancing at shadows that lingered too long, shapes that didn't match anything real. And the whispers, they never stopped. Sometimes I would hear a soft, deliberate, almost human voice murmur my name, calling me back to the garden, back to the house, back to the woods. One night, I dreamed I returned to the house. It was empty, silent, but the air was thick, heavy with anticipation. I walked through the living room, smelled the decay, saw the dust on the photos, and then I realized the shadows were there too, not hiding, not flickering. They were watching, stationary, patient. And then I saw them again, the figures, the hollow-eyed family. But this time they spoke, not words I could understand, but their intent was clear. They were waiting for me to follow. I woke at 4:13 a.m., soaked in sweat, shaking uncontrollably. I lit the lamp, tried to reassure myself. Nothing was in the room, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Shadows stretched toward me, whispering still. I couldn't go back to the apartment without feeling their gaze. The dreams had invaded my reality, and I didn't know which was worse. I began leaving the house earlier in the mornings, driving aimlessly, trying to outrun the shadows in my mind. But the streets seemed to fold, corners stretching too long, alleys too dark. Every turn reminded me of the woods, the garden, the evidence, and the whispers. They never stopped. I realized something then. The Hendersons weren't missing in the way I had thought. They were gone, yes, but they had left fragments behind. Shadows, whispers, prints, dolls' mud. Handprints. All of it carried a piece of them. And I was seeing those pieces now in the spaces between reality and dreams. They were echoes. And echoes have a way of following you, shaping your thoughts, bending your perception until you aren't sure what is real. I haven't slept properly since. Every night, the same shadows, the same whispers, the same hollow eyes. And I know this isn't going to end. The garden, the woods, the house, they left me their story. A story told in fragments, in mud, in rain, in whispers. And I am trapped in it now. Their echoes have become mine. I write this down to remember, to anchor myself in some fragment reality. I need to believe I'm awake. I need to believe the world outside my apartment is solid, but I can feel it. I can feel them in the corners of the room, in the shifting shadows, in the subtle movements that vanish when I look directly. They are patient. They are waiting. And one day, perhaps, they will want more than fragments. For now, I live in their echoes. I hear them in the night, feel them in the day, and I wonder if the Hendersons are watching, or if what remains of them is something else entirely, something that has learned to linger. I don't know if I'm safe, and I'm not sure I ever will be. I got the call late at night, the kind of call that makes your stomach tighten before you even answer. A hiker reporting screams near a remote cabin, deep in the mountains. The dispatcher's voice was clipped tight, like they didn't want to say too much over the radio. Sheriff. Hikers at the Pine Ridge Trail heard screaming. Could be someone in trouble. Cabins off the main road. I grabbed my jacket, my flashlight, and my old service rifle. The mountains weren't far, but at night, every twist of the road felt endless. Rain had started falling in sheets, hammering against the windshield, turning the forest into a blur of black and silver. I kept my headlights low, but every time I rounded a bend, the trees seemed closer, taller, like they were leaning toward the road, watching. I thought about the hiker's report. Screams. At night, in a remote area. Most times, it was just animals or someone drunk. But I'd learned to trust that tightening in my chest, the one that told me something was off. Tonight, it was screaming at me. The road ended in a narrow dirt path, rutted and slick with mud. I parked the cruiser and stepped out. The air was cold, sharp, carrying the scent of wet pine and earth. Silence lay over the forest, thick and heavy. Only the rain broke it. I should have turned back, but curiosity and duty pressed me forward. The cabin had a story, and I was about to find it. The trail was narrow, twisting through thick trees. Roots rose like hands reaching from the ground. My boots squelched in the mud. The rain soaked through my jacket in minutes. I tried not to notice how the darkness seemed to press closer with every step. And then I heard it, the scream. It wasn't long, not continuous. Just a single, high-pitched wail, distant, then swallowed by the storm. My chest tightened. Whoever, or whatever, made that sound had been terrified. I kept moving, flashlight cutting a weak circle through the darkness, eyes straining for signs. The mountains have a way of warping sound. I couldn't tell which direction the scream had come from. Then I saw it, a faint glow flickering through the trees. A cabin, tucked into a clearing, roof dark with rain, windows dimly lit. It wasn't abandoned. Not yet. I moved closer, careful, ears straining. The screams had repeated, but the forest seemed alive, breathing around me, pressing in with shadows that shifted when I blinked. The door was closed, but not locked. I pushed it gently. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood, smoke, and something else. Something sharp, metallic, that made my stomach knot. It was small, cramped. A single light hung overhead, swinging slightly, though there was no wind inside. Furniture was overturned, paper scattered. And then I heard it again, a whisper, not human words, not language I could understand, but urgent, pleading, deliberate. It came from the far corner, where the kitchen met the living room. My flashlight cut across the floor. I froze. There was nothing visible, but the air itself felt wrong. Heavy, waiting, watching. I moved forward. My boots made soft thuds on the wet wood. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I couldn't. I had to see, had to know, and that's when I noticed the signs. A small shoe, tipped on its side near the table, mud still clinging to the sole. A torn sleeve, tiny, caught on a chair. I swallowed hard. Whoever had been here, they hadn't left willingly. The whispers grew louder, but still soft, curling around the room. I spun my flashlight in every direction. Shadows stretched, warping, creeping along the walls. I kept telling myself it was just my mind, overworked, imagining things. But the fear didn't lie. I found footprints, small, delicate, moving across the floor, wet mud tracking toward the back door. I followed them slowly, careful not to disturb anything more. They weren't animal prints. Not deer, not raccoon. They were human, or close enough to human to send a chill down my spine. And they ended at the door. I opened the back door. The rain poured in, soaking me instantly. Outside, the forest pressed close, trees dripping with water, branches swaying despite the calm air within the clearing. Footprints continued into the wet grass, leading toward the tree line. I crouched, studying them. Small, erratic, panicked. Whoever had made them had run. But they hadn't escaped far. Something, or someone, had been waiting. I turned back to the cabin. The whispers had stopped. Silence returned, thick, almost suffocating. I could feel in my bones. I wasn't alone. Something lingered, watching, patient, waiting. And I wasn't sure I wanted to know what. I stepped forward again, toward the tree line. My flashlight beam cut weakly through the dark. Rain ran down my neck, soaking my hair, and then I saw a movement. Quick, shadowed, too fluid for a person. I spun. Nothing. Only trees, dripping and silent. My chest tightened. My hand hovered over my rifle, but I didn't raise it. I wasn't ready for what it might reveal. The footprints led deeper into the forest, twisted between roots, vanished into a thick tangle of underbrush. I followed as far as I dared, heart hammering, every nerve screaming. Then the scream again, high-pitched, terrified, human, or almost human. It cut through the rain, through the trees, echoing off the slopes. And then silence. I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind raced. Could the hikers have been mistaken? Could someone have gotten lost? Maybe. But the cabin, the overturned furniture, the small shoes, the footprints, they weren't mistakes. They were evidence. And they were fresh. The forest seemed to shift around me. Shadows stretched unnaturally between the trees. Leaves rustled, though no wind stirred. Something watched from above, from the dark corners, from just beyond my flashlight's beam. And I realized the scream hadn't come from far away. It had come from here, from these woods. And whatever it had been, it was gone now. Or hiding, waiting. I backed toward the cabin, trying to keep my footing in the slick mud. My flashlight scanned the perimeter. The rain blurred everything, turning shapes into monsters, turning trees into looming figures. I shook my head, telling myself it was just weather, just exhaustion, just imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes followed me, that something breathed behind the trunks, tracking my every step. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the dim light was a small comfort. The smell of smoke and wet was grounding. I searched again, slower this time, more careful. Every overturned chair, every scattered paper told a story, but it was incomplete. Whoever had been here had vanished, leaving pieces behind. Small shoes, torn sleeves, wet footprints. Clues pointing toward terror, toward fear, toward something beyond explanation. I left the cabin at first light. The forest seemed different now, quieter, patient, almost alive in its waiting. My boots left tracks in the mud, but they were my own. For now, I kept looking over my shoulder. I didn't hear anything else. Not yet, but the memory of the scream, high-pitched and terrified, lingered. It would follow me, back in my cruiser, headlights cutting through the mist. I tried to piece it together. A hiker's report, a cabin in the woods, footprints, signs of struggle, and the scream. I couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it, but I knew one thing. Someone had been in that cabin. Someone had been terrified, and they hadn't come out. The mountains hold secrets. I've learned that. But tonight, I realized how patient they can be, how they can hide things in plain sight. waiting for someone to stumble into their web. The cabin, the footprints, the scream. They were only the beginning, and I wasn't sure I was ready to find out the rest. Rain continued to fall, hammering the roof of the cruiser. The windshield wipers struggled to keep the view clear. My hands rested on the wheel, cold, shaking slightly. The road back seemed longer than ever. Trees loomed, shadows moving in ways that made no sense. I told myself it was exhaustion, imagination, nerves, but the tightening in my chest didn't lie. I will go back. I realized I have to. Whoever, or whatever, was in that cabin needs to be found. And yet, the thought of returning, of walking back in the forest, sends a chill down my spine I can't shake. The mountains are patient. They wait, and I can feel it, even now. Watching, waiting. I returned to the cabin the next morning, even though every instinct in me screamed not to. The road was slick with rain from the night before, mud clinging to my tires like it was holding me back. Mist hung over the forest, thick and heavy, turning the mountains into shadows of themselves. The world felt softer, slower, but somehow more watchful. The hikers had given me rough directions to the area where they'd heard the screams. I drove as far as I could, then left the cruiser on a narrow dirt trail and trudged the rest of the way on foot. The mist curled around the trees like smoke, making the trunks look taller, denser. Every step I took felt amplified, every snap of a branch underfoot echoing too loudly. The cabin came into view, half shrouded in fog. Its windows were dull with condensation, roof dark with moisture. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, and yet I felt eyes on me. Always eyes. I stepped closer. The front door was closed, just as I had left it, but the air was different, pressed, almost vibrating with a quiet tension. I started around the perimeter. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Human-like, maybe adult, maybe child. I couldn't tell at first. They were pressed into the soft mud near the back of the cabin. Small and careful, leading out into the forest. I knelt, traced the edges with my gloved fingers. The prints were fresh, too fresh, but they didn't go far, just a few steps, then vanished, swallowed by the mist. I followed the trail. Every step felt heavier than the last. The mist made everything disorienting, the trees blending into one another, the ground uneven and wet. The footprints reappeared here and there, fragmented like the person or thing had been moving in circles, unsure of where to go. And then, just as abruptly, they were gone again. The silence was thick. My own breathing sounded loud, the beat of my heart louder. I want to call it in, radio the station, ask for backup, but I didn't. Something told me this was mine to see through. Something told me no one else would understand what I might find. I noticed signs beside the prints. Twigs bent, leaves crushed, earth pressed down as if someone had knelt in the mud, studying the surroundings. The air smelled of wet earth and something else, faint but unmistakable, a metallic tang that made my stomach tighten. I swallowed, forcing myself to keep moving. The footprints led toward a small clearing. The mist was thicker here, curling low over the ground, twisting like fingers. And then I saw it, something impossible. A shoe, one of the hikers' lost shoes, or maybe not theirs. Small, delicate, but caked in mud and wet. I picked it up, holding it against my chest. Cold, real, and then I heard it. A soft whisper carried through the mist, so faint I almost convinced myself it wasn't there. I followed the trail again, stepping carefully to avoid disturbing the prints. The footprints never led anywhere solid. They paused, shifted, sometimes doubled back. It was as if whoever or whatever had made them didn't want to be found. And I couldn't help thinking they were watching, always watching. The mist thickened as I moved deeper into the forest. Trees leaned overhead, branches like arms reaching out. Shadows pulled in the corners of my vision, twisting and retreating when I tried to focus. I kept telling myself it was my imagination, that the mind plays tricks when the world is gray and silent. But the prints didn't lie, and neither did the tightness in my chest. I found more signs. A torn sleeve, muddy, snagged on a branch. A tiny handprint pressed into the soil, fingers splayed wide, and then a set of footprints that weren't quite human. Too long, too narrow, and spaced in a way that suggested movement I couldn't explain. My pulse quickened. My flashlight trembled in my hand. The mist thickened around the prints, swallowing them as quickly as they appeared. I stopped in the center of the clearing, shining my flashlight around. The mist glowed slightly in the beam, silver and swirling. The footprints ended abruptly here. No more marks, no signs of passage, only the silence. And then the whisper again, curling around me, almost teasing, almost guiding. I couldn't make out words, only a feeling, an urgency, a warning. I traced the clearing's edges, checking for paths the mist might be hiding. Nothing, just a cabin back there, the trees surrounding me, the earth soft and wet. And still I could feel it, the presence, something patient, watching, waiting. The mist carried it, or maybe it carried the mist. I didn't know where it ended, where the forest began, or if I was even in control anymore. I took a step back toward the cabin. Every branch that scraped my jacket felt deliberate, like the forest itself was trying to slow me down, to make me see, to make me understand. I kept my flashlight sweeping, ears straining, and then I noticed the small signs the footprints had left behind. Twigs arranged in patterns, small depressions in the earth, leaves stacked unnaturally. They weren't random. Someone or something had been marking the path, guiding or taunting. I crouched to examine a mark near a fallen log, mud pressed down into the soil, long and deliberate. I could see the outline of a foot, toes spread as if the person had stumbled or braced for something. I traced it slowly. My fingers went numb. I didn't want to know what had left it. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. Not yet. The mist thickened further. Shapes moved just beyond the edges of my flashlight. Shadows that melted when I tried to focus. I could hear whispers behind me, soft, urgent, circling, and then I noticed the footprints again, appearing where they had disappeared. Small, human-like, leading away from the clearing, deeper into the forest. I followed them. Every step was a struggle. My boots sank into the mud, my jacket soaked through, my hands trembling. I kept expecting the trail to vanish again, but it didn't. The footprints led me farther than I had expected, twisting through the trees, looping around roots, vanishing and reappearing like they were alive. And then, abruptly, they stopped. No marks in the mud, no signs of passage, nothing but the mist curling at my boots, silver and thick. And that whisper, close now, like it was right behind my ear, made me freeze. I could feel eyes on me, even though I couldn't see anything. And in that instant, I realized the truth. The footprints had never been meant to lead anywhere. They were meant to draw me in, to show me, to make me follow. I stood there, shivering, listening. The forest was silent now, save for the rain dripping from leaves. My breath came in shallow gasps, and then I noticed something faint in the mist, a shadow, elongated, slipping between the trees. Not fully visible, just a suggestion of movement. I lifted my flashlight, but it was gone. Nothing remained but the mist and the muddy clearing. I turned back toward the cabin, moving slowly. My boots squelched through the mud, heart hammering, ears straining. Every now and then, I could hear whispers, soft and urgent, curling through the mist, urging me forward, pulling me back, warning me. I didn't understand them. I didn't have to. The forest was alive with them, and I was part of it now. Back at the cabin, the warmth and dryness felt temporary, fragile. The mist still clung to the edges of the clearing, curling around the foundation, pressing against the walls. I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't rest. The footprints had drawn me here for a reason, and that reason wasn't finished with me. I left the forest reluctantly, mist curling around my legs, eyes on me even when I couldn't see. Every step back to my truck was a struggle, mud and roots conspiring to slow me down. The footprints followed me in memory, in feeling, in the whispers that had begun to echo in my mind. Whoever, or whatever, had made them didn't want to be found. They wanted me to see, and I had. By the time I reached the road, sunlight was weak and pale through the mist. I sat in my cruiser, soaked and trembling, trying to make sense of it. The hiker's screams, the footprints, the whispering shadows in the mist. None of it made sense in the world I knew. And yet it was real. Every mark, Every sound, every trace. Real. I drove slowly down the mountain, glancing back at the mist-shrouded cabin and the forest beyond. Something watched from there. I could feel it. Patient. Waiting. And I knew it wasn't finished. The footprints, the whispers, the mist. They would pull me back. One way or another. I couldn't stay away from the cabin. Not after the footprints. Not after the whispers and the mist. Every instinct screamed at me, warning me to turn back. But some deeper part of me, the part that's always drawn to the things that shouldn't exist, pushed me forward. The morning was gray, the mountains hidden beneath low-hanging clouds. Rain from the night before had turned the dirt road to mud, but the air was still heavy with the smell of wet pine and earth. I parked at the edge of the trail and trudged through the slick grass, boots sinking into the soft ground. My flashlight cut through the dim light, swinging nervously from side to side, scanning the cabin that waited like a dark eye in the clearing. The front door creaked under my hand as I pushed it open. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and decay, faint smoke lingering from the old fireplace. The place had been abandoned for years by anyone who lived there, except someone had left marks. Small, subtle signs, scratches along the floorboards, depressions in the carpet, smudges on the walls. The kind of marks that told a story, but only if you knew how to read them. I started by checking the main floor again, slowly, methodically. Furniture still stood, though most of it had been knocked over or shifted. Papers littered the floor, some torn, some sodden from previous storms. Then I saw it, a floorboard slightly lifted near the corner. My chest tightened. I knelt and tested it. It shifted, just enough. My flashlight beam caught the edge. There was a handle, small, carved, hidden beneath layers of dust. I hesitated. Something about that spot felt wrong. Not wrong in a way I could see, but wrong in my bones. Every horror story I'd ever heard about hidden basements and secret rooms flashed in my mind. And yet, I lifted the board. It was heavier than I expected, and it groaned as I moved it aside. Below, a narrow staircase descended into darkness. The air that came up was cold, musty, and carried the faintest hint of something metallic. I swallowed hard. My hand rested on the railing as I descended, each step creaking under my weight. Darkness swallowed the bottom of the stairs. My flashlight's beam barely reached the first few steps. The shadows pressed close, curling around the walls like smoke. I reached the bottom. The basement was small, claustrophobic, damp. Stone walls closing on me, dripping water from above. The air smelled of mold and rust. And then I saw it. A door, old, wooden, padlock broken but still hanging, swinging slightly as if it had been disturbed recently. My breath hitched. Someone or something had been down here. I pushed the door open. Inside, the room was larger than I expected, filled with remnants of a life long gone. Shelves lined the walls, dusty and sagging under the weight of old jars and boxes. But the floor told a different story. Scratches, deep gouges, marks of struggle pressed into the concrete. And in the center of it all, I found a journal, leather-bound, thick, yellowed pages curling at the edges. I picked it up with trembling hands. The first page was scrawled in a tight, furious hand. They watch. They never leave. I must hide it. My heart hammered. I flipped through more pages. Entries detailed the residents' descent into obsession. Shadows moving the corners of the cabin. Whispers in the walls. The sense of being watched every moment of every day. And then drawings. Jagged, almost childlike, of figures I couldn't quite recognize. Faces elongated, eyes hollow, mouths twisted. They seemed to shift when I looked away. Impossible forms sketched in ink that had cracked with age. One page showed the cabin, the forest, and a series of tiny footprints leading in circles around the structure, disappearing into the darkness of the trees. I felt a cold hand grip my spine, not literally, but in that gnawing sense of dread that told me I was being watched. The shadows in the basement thickened. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest. I could hear it then, a soft scrape, like nails on wood, coming from somewhere just out of reach. My flashlight trembled in my hands. The journal fell open to a page with words I could barely read, smeared and blurred. Do not follow. They will take. They always return. My stomach twisted. I realized the resident hadn't left by choice. Not fully. Something had claimed this place long ago. Something patient, deliberate, lurking in the corners, shaping the life of anyone who entered. I stepped back, heart hammering, flashlight swinging. That's when I noticed the cage. Small, rusted, pushed into the corner, door hanging open. I didn't want to look inside, but I had to. The floor of the cage was lined with straw, old, damp, and between the straw, something had been there. Signs of life. Small, human-like. Marks pressed into the floor, like the cage had held something frightened, desperate, alive. I stumbled back. My mind raced, trying to process it. The journal, the cage, the scratches, the footprints. It all connected. The resident had hidden something, someone long ago, and I could feel it in the air. The same oppressive weight I had felt in the forest, the cabin, the basement. Watching, waiting, patient. A sudden draft brushed my neck. I spun, nothing visible. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch further, as if leaning toward me. I realized then that the basement wasn't empty. Not really. I could feel presence, just beyond the reach of the flashlight beam. The resident had left traces of it here, hidden in plain sight, and it lingered still. I flipped through more pages of the journal. Notes detailing the hidden basement's construction, warnings to future visitors, confessions of fear. They will take you if you are careless. Never stay too long. Never linger. Each word pressed on me like a weight. I had lingered too long already. Then I saw it. Scratch marks on the walls, higher than anyone's reach recent. Fresh. My pulse spiked. Someone or something had been here recently. The basement was not abandoned. It was occupied in ways I couldn't yet understand. I needed to leave. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't move. Not at first. The sense of being watched grew, pressing into me, curling around me, making it hard to breathe. And then I realized the basement, the journal, the cage, it wasn't a secret. The secret was alive, patient, waiting for the next person who dared come too close. I scrambled up the stairs, flashlight bouncing, heart hammering. The door at the top slammed shut behind me. I froze. Only the sound of my own ragged breathing filled the cabin. I tried to rationalize, telling myself it was wind, old hinges, the storm outside, but I knew better. I could feel it. I could feel the presence lingering just beyond sight, patient, deliberate. Outside, the forest seemed quieter, unnaturally so. The mist hung low, curling around the cabin, pressing close. I glanced back. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a movement in the shadows between the trees. A figure? A stretch of darkness? I wasn't sure, but I knew it was waiting, and I knew I hadn't seen the last of it. I drove back down the mountain, headlights cutting through the mist, mind racing. Every turn, every bend, felt longer than the last. The journal sat on the passenger seat, its pages curling in the damp heat of the truck. I couldn't stop thinking about the cage, the footprints, the shadows. The resident had tried to hide the truth, but it remained. Patient, waiting, watching. At the station, I sat alone, reading the journal again. The entries told of madness, fear, obsession, and the lingering presence that had haunted the cabin for decades. And I realized something I didn't want to admit. I had touched it. I had seen it. And now it was aware of me. I haven't returned to the cabin since that day. Not yet, but I know I will. There are questions I can't leave unanswered. The hidden basement, the journal, the cage, they are pieces of something larger, something patient, deliberate, beyond explanation. And I can feel it following me, a cold awareness in the back of my mind, whispers that curl around my thoughts, shadows that linger in the corners of every room I enter. The cabin's secret isn't just a hidden basement or a long-gone resident. It's the presence that remained, the careful patience, the weight of something that waits. And I know, deep down, that one day I will return. The mountains have a way of keeping secrets. And some secrets, once touched, never let go. The call came in just as my shift was supposed to be winding down. Quiet night. Streets empty. The hum of fluorescent lights above the station almost comforting. But there's always a tension in the last hours of a night shift. A kind of waiting. like the world is holding its breath. Dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. "Sheriff, you're going to come down to the station. We've got a situation." I frowned, pulling my coat tighter. What kind of situation? There was a pause, just long enough to make the hairs on my neck stand up. A body, just arrived. No details. You'll see when you get here. That's when my stomach tightened. Bodies don't just arrive on quiet nights without explanation. Something about the word made it heavier, more deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and keys, moving fast through the empty parking lot to the cruiser. The night was cold, the streetlights pale, struggling to reach the dark edges of town. I felt every shadow in the corners of my eyes, every gust of wind like a warning. When I pulled up to the station, the lights of the garage flickered against the wet pavement. The back doors were open. Inside, a stretcher sat in the center, covered with a white sheet. The paramedics stepped back, uneasy. I could feel their tension before they even spoke. "Found him this evening," one of them said. "Dropped off by, well, no one knows, just appeared at the edge of town, in the old lane behind the mill." I swallowed hard. "No witnesses? No identification? Nothing," he said. His voice was tight, almost scared. "We didn't even want to touch it until you arrived." I approached the stretcher slowly, trying to steel myself. Night had a way of turning even familiar places into strange, unfamiliar landscapes. The fluorescent light above cast harsh shadows, making every curve of the body under the sheet sharper, more defined. I felt my hands go cold as I reached out. I pulled the sheet back. The body wasn't mutilated. Not physically, at least, but there was something wrong. The expression frozen on his face wasn't natural. Eyes wide, mouth half open as if he'd screamed, though no sound remained. His hands were stiff. Fingers curled like he'd been grasping for something unseen. And then I noticed the skin. Pale, yes, but tinged with an odd gray, almost lifeless in a way that didn't make sense. I took a step back. My mind scrambled. A heart attack? Poison? Something else? The problem was there was no context. No clue. No one had seen him arrive. No one could tell me why he was here. And the way he lay on the stretcher, it felt deliberate, like a message. I remembered the dispatcher's words, how she hesitated. That pause. Something had been uneasy in her voice, more than just protocol. And now I understood why. There was an atmosphere in the room, thick, almost suffocating, like the night had followed the body in, bringing shadows with it. I stepped closer again, examined the body. Nothing on him, no wallet, no phone, nothing. Just clothes, ordinary enough. Wet and muddy in spots as if he walked through rain or forest. But his shoes were clean. Too clean, somehow, like they hadn't touched the ground at all. My chest tightened. Something wasn't right. I pulled on gloves, feeling the latex snap against my skin. Professional detachment, I told myself. Just another case. Bodies arrive every night. Some of them make sense. Some don't. You learn to take the ones that don't in stride. But this one whispered differently. I moved around him, checking for marks, injuries, anything. Nothing obvious. No wounds. No signs of struggle. Just that frozen expression, the stiffness, the impossible silence of death. And that feeling, the one you can't put into words, the one that crawls up your spine. The room itself was holding its breath, waiting, watching. I spoke to the paramedics. Try and maintain control. You said he was found at the edge of town? They nodded, near the old lane. Just appeared there by the fence line. No footprints, nothing else around. We thought maybe someone dumped him, but the ground didn't show signs of a struggle. Nothing. My mind raced. No witnesses. No prints. Clean shoes. Frozen expression. Something about it all screamed staged, or worse, intentional. Someone or something had left him here with a purpose. I stepped back, rubbing my temples. The lights overhead hummed. Too bright, too steady. Shadows pooled in the corners of the garage. I could feel them just at the edge of vision, almost stretching toward me. I shook my head. Night plays tricks. Heart racing. I forced myself to think logically, trace the timeline, find the facts, ignore the unease. but it followed me. The feeling, that pressure in the air, like the body had brought something with it, a presence, something patient, deliberate, watching me as I examined it. I had felt it before on night shifts, on those rare calls that linger long after they're over, but this was different, stronger, cold, almost hungry. I stepped outside for a moment, needing air. Rain had started lightly, mist curling off the asphalt, blurring the streetlights. I could see the edge of town, the darkened lane leading toward the mill. No sign of life, just shadows, mist, and the lingering sense that someone or something was still out there unseen. Back inside, I move again around the body. Check for identification again. Nothing. I felt the creeping awareness settle in my chest. This wasn't a simple death, not a mundane tragedy. It was deliberate, and whoever or whatever had placed him here wanted found, wanted me to see. The thought made my skin crawl. I stared at the ceiling, trying to ground myself, breathe. The station felt too quiet, too still. The lights hummed. My own breathing sounded loud, ragged, and I realized the body was more than a corpse. It was a message, a warning, a marker. Something about it was unnatural. I glanced again at the man. His eyes, though lifeless, seemed almost aware, not moving, not blinking, but present, watching. I could feel the weight of them on me. And then, faintly, almost beneath the hum of the fluorescent lights, I heard it, a whisper, just one, soft, so soft I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. "Don't," it said. My pulse spiked. I swung the flashlight toward the corner. Nothing, only the shadows stretching along the walls, distorting and dark. But the whisper had come from somewhere, inside me, around me. I couldn't tell. My chest tightened. Every logical explanation I had fell away. This was beyond reason, beyond understanding. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the body. The paramedics gave me a wide berth, glancing nervously at the corners of the garage. We all felt it, something lingering, something deliberate, waiting. I tried to shake it off, focus on procedure, document the scene, call the coroner. But that feeling, the patient, silent, pressing presence, followed me in every step. Hours passed. The coroner arrived, taking notes, photographs. I stood to the side, flashlight still clutched, mind racing. Questions piled up. Who was he? How did he get there? Why was everything so precise? No disturbance. No evidence beyond his presence. And the whispers, they never returned, not audibly. But the sense of being watched remained. Heavy, insistent. I could feel it in my shoulders, my chest, pressing down like a weight I couldn't lift. The body was gone by the morning, loaded into the coroner's van. But I could still feel it, lingering in the corners of the garage, and the hum of the fluorescent lights, in the quiet after the doors closed. I stayed behind, alone, cleaning up evidence, trying to anchor myself. Rain drummed on the roof, soft, steady. Shadows lingered in the corners. I tried to shake them off, but couldn't. I could still feel eyes on me, patient, deliberate, waiting. By the time my shift ended, the streets were pale with dawn. I left the station slowly, checking behind me more than once. Nothing moved, nothing followed, and yet I knew, I could feel it. The body had been a message, and whatever or whoever had sent it was still out there, watching, waiting for the next step. Even now, I can feel it. Every time I close my eyes, I see him on the stretcher, pale, stiff, expression frozen in silent terror. I hear that single whisper, soft, deliberate, almost patient. "Don't!" And I don't know if it's a warning or an invitation. I remember walking back into the garage that night, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, cold and sharp against the dark outside. The body was still there, resting on the stretcher as if waiting for me. I had thought I'd processed it the first time, thought I understood what I was seeing, but I was wrong. The coroner hadn't arrived yet, and the paramedics gave me space. Their unease was palpable, hanging in the corners like the shadows themselves were watching. I leaned over the body again, gloves snapping against my skin, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. I tried to tell myself to focus. Procedure, observation, facts, not fear. At first glance, everything matched what the dispatcher had told me. A man, mid-30s, pale, stiff, mouth slightly open, eyes frozen wide in some silent terror. But when I looked closer, I noticed things that didn't make sense. Small bruises, faint at first, but unmistakable, lined his wrists and forearms. Not defensive wounds. They were too uniform, too precise, like someone had pressed him deliberately, held him down, and then faint scratch marks along the sides of his torso, shallow, almost hidden by the way he lay. The official report had said there were no signs of struggle. That report was wrong. I ran my fingers along a tiny indentation near his neck. Not a cut, not a bite, something else. Deliberate, purposeful, but not easily categorized. I shivered. This wasn't a typical death. Not an accident, not a natural cause. Something had marked him. And the worst part, I couldn't figure out how it had happened. I stepped back, letting the flashlight sweep across the body. Everything about it felt staged, like the man had been arranged, carefully positioned. The expression, frozen in panic. The hands, stiff. Fingers bent as if he had grasped for something unseen. And the injuries, they didn't match the story. No footprints, no witness, no signs of scuffle. Nothing. Yet here he was, altered, changed, transformed by something unseen. My mind raced. Could it be a predator? One of those rare, violent cases that leave no trace? Maybe, but no animal, no human could leave bruises like these and vanish without a mark in the surrounding area. Something about the injuries seemed deliberate in a way that made my stomach twist. Someone or something was sending a message. The paramedics watched me silently, their unease growing. I could feel it too, heavy in the air like static before a storm. Something lingered here. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it clearly, but I could feel its presence. Patient, deliberate, watching. I knelt again, examining the scratches on his side. They were small, precise, shallow, too uniform for a fall, too intentional to be accidental. Whoever, or whatever, had done this wanted it hidden in plain sight. My stomach tightened. Every instinct I had as a sheriff told me this wasn't ordinary. This was something else. Something patient. Something that lingered. I glanced at his hands. Fingers curled. Nails broken in places that didn't align with the reported timeline. There was a story written in bruises and marks, intention frozen in flesh. But it was a story I couldn't read fully. Something in the body resisted explanation. My flashlight caught a glint on the right hand. A small cut, shallow but deep enough to be deliberate. And yet, it didn't match any of the reported injuries. My pulse quickened. The air around me felt heavier, almost viscous. Shadows clung to the corners of the garage. I told myself to breathe, to focus. There were facts. There were observations. But every rational thought collided with a deeper, stranger awareness. This wasn't just a corpse. It was a puzzle, a warning, and a presence all at once. I stepped back again, trying to shake off the unease. The garage was quiet, rain pattering faintly against the roof outside. But the shadows moved, or maybe I imagined them. It's hard to tell when your mind is searching for explanations, and the air itself seems alive. I forced myself to scan the body from a distance. Everything felt wrong, not just the injuries, but the way the light hit him, the way the space around him seemed to tense and relax with my breathing. I noticed the feet next. Shoes, clean, impossibly clean, as if he hadn't walked through the mud or the streets. Mud smudges on the pants suggested otherwise, but the soles told a different story. Something was off, something I couldn't name. And the faint bruise patterns on the ankles, they suggested pressure, restraint, something I had no frame of reference for. I reached for my notebook, scribbling details quickly, trying to anchor myself. Factual observations, nothing speculative. But even as I wrote, my mind raced ahead. Who did this? How did this happen? And why was it left for me to find? The body itself seemed to be speaking in silence, telling me its story in bruises and scratches and impossible angles. I leaned closer again, noticing a thin, almost imperceptible indentation along the back of his neck. Not a wound in the traditional sense, but a mark, like a pressure imprint, deep enough to suggest a hand had been placed there firmly. My stomach turned. Someone or something had been close, intimate, invasive, and yet no other signs existed in the room. No prints, no fibers, nothing. The paramedics shifted nervously, but no one spoke. We all knew better than to break the tension with words. Something about this body changed the air, shifted it. Heavy, patient, waiting, watching. I could feel it in my chest and my throat, like a cold hand pressing down. I studied the face again. Eyes wide, frozen, mouth slightly open. Skin gray, almost lifeless, but not entirely. There was a shimmer of something beneath the surface, a tension that felt alive, unnatural. My mind recoiled. I'd seen death before many times, but this was different. There was awareness here, lingering, resisting explanation. I backed away, flashlight scanning the garage again. Shadows clung to corners, stretched unnaturally. My hand shook slightly. The notebook damped my grip. I reminded myself that fear was normal, that imagination runs wild on night shifts. But every rational explanation collided with the physical reality of the injuries. Small, precise, deliberate. Marks that made no sense. A body that shouldn't exist in this way. Presented like a puzzle. I glanced at the paramedics again. Their faces pale, tight, aware of something they couldn't name. None of us had spoken the obvious thought, that the body itself was more than it seemed, that the injuries were a language, one we weren't trained to read. I straightened, taking a deep breath. Procedure, observations, documentation. That was all I could cling to. I checked the stretcher again, slowly, methodically, noting every scratch, every bruise, every mark. None of it aligned with the report. None of it made sense. And that's when I felt it, the awareness, not in sight, not in sound, but pressing into me, patient, deliberate, almost curious. I stepped back outside, needing air, needing space. Rain misted my face, cold against my skin. The night was empty, silent except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights bleeding through the garage. But I could still feel it, like the body had brought something with it. Something watching, waiting, following. Inside, the body waited silently. The injuries told a story I couldn't piece together, a pattern I couldn't decode. And even though the coroner would arrive soon, even though I would write my notes and follow protocol, I knew something else had happened here, something deliberate, something beyond explanation. I left the garage that night, knowing that the report was wrong, the body was wrong, and whatever had caused the injuries, whatever had left those marks, was still out there, waiting, patient, silent. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see those bruises, those scratches, that tension frozen in flesh. I can feel it pressing on my mind, a quiet insistence that some things are meant to be observed, understood, and feared. The body wasn't just dead. It was a warning, and I hadn't yet understood who or what had left it for me. The morgue has a way of making you feel small. Cold tile floors, pale fluorescent lights that hum constantly, and a quiet that presses down so hard it feels alive. I've walked these halls dozens of times before, but that night was different. Something was off. I had come back to check the body again. The injuries, the bruises, the impossible marks, they still didn't make sense. Even the coroner admitted as much. I wasn't supposed to be there, not after hours, but I needed to see for myself, needed to make sure nothing was missed. The doors hissed shut behind me. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and decay. I shivered, pulling my coat tighter. The lights flickered overhead, briefly dimming, then brightening again. I told myself it was old wiring, nothing more, but the shadows seemed to move in the corners. Just a flicker, a twitch. I blinked and it was gone. I approached the slab where the body rested. Everything looked the same as before, pale frozen, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. But the room felt alive, quiet but not empty. There was a weight here, pressing against my chest, subtle, insistent. I shook it off. It was just the morgue. It always felt like this at night. Then I heard it, a soft scrape, barely audible like nails on tile. I froze. The sound didn't come from anywhere specific. It seemed to move around me, just beyond the edges of vision. My pulse spiked. I scanned the room with the flashlight I had brought. The beam cut across walls, table cabinets, But there was nothing, only shadows, thick and curling at the edges of the lights. I stepped closer to the body. My hands were trembling, not from cold, but from awareness, like something was just behind my senses, watching. I leaned over, checking again for injuries, bruises, markings. Nothing new, and yet the feeling remained. There was again a whisper, faint, almost imperceptible. Not words, not syllables I could recognize, just a breath against my ear. I spun, flashlight swinging. Empty hallway, empty room, only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the low hum of my own heartbeat. I reminded myself, rational, observations, facts, not imagination. But then movement caught my eye, a shadow flicking across the far wall. Quick, too fast to be my own. I swung the flashlight, but nothing, just darkness stretching behind cabinets and counters. My stomach tightened. The body itself seemed different, not in physicality, not in injury, but in presence. It pressed into the room, like the frozen form carried an echo of something that had been alive. I knelt, touching the cold metal of the slab. A shiver ran up my spine. I could feel tension here, not just in the body, but in the room itself, like the air had memory, had awareness. Another sound, softer this time, like someone breathing. Not the coroner, not the paramedics, not me. It was close, closer than anything else. I held my flashlight steady, turning slowly. Nothing, only the hum, only shadows, only the sense of being watched. I stepped back, leaning against the counter. The slab gleamed under the pale light. I stared at the body, noticing the hands. Still curled, still stiff, still impossible. I had seen death before. I had cataloged it, documented it, accepted it. But this had a weight, a presence. I couldn't explain it. And that whispering, faint and intermittent, made me doubt everything I thought I knew. Then a movement, quick, on the periphery of the light. I froze, focused, nothing visible, just the corner of the room. And yet I knew I had seen it. Something shifted there, just enough to remind me I wasn't alone. My pulse hammered. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I stayed. I had to understand. I had to see. I walked around the slab, flashlight sweeping. Cabinets, drawers, shelves, empty, but the sense of presence didn't leave. It moved with me, whispered with me, pressing on me. The morgue had become a room that breathed, that watched, that waited. I could almost hear footsteps echoing softly in time of my own. But when I spun, there was nothing. The body caught my eye again. Eyes wide, frozen, mouth slightly open. But there was something subtle, impossible, just behind the gaze. I blinked and thought I saw the lids twitch. Just a fraction. My hand tightened on the flashlight. Logic told me nothing moved, but my senses screamed otherwise. A drawer across the room rattled softly. Not slammed, not pushed, just a quiet rattle, like someone brushing against it. I froze, listening. Silence. I moved toward it cautiously, the beam cutting across the metal handles. Nothing. Empty. And yet, I could still feel it. The presence, patient, deliberate. I stepped back, tried to shake the feeling. Tell myself it was the old building, the hum of the lights, my own imagination. But even in that rational moment, I could feel it pressing closer. A weight at my chest, a shadow curling along the edges of my vision, and then another whisper, softer than the first, almost tender, but it carried intent, purpose. I swallowed hard, trying to calm myself. The body lay still. The room was quiet, and yet I knew I was not alone. I could feel something moving in the corners, in the spaces the light could not reach. Patient, watching, waiting. I didn't want to know why, and yet I did. I stepped back to the center of the room. The whispering stopped. The shadows seemed to hold their breath. The body lay there, frozen in silence, but the air itself felt different, charged, expectant. I knew, without understanding how, that the morgue had become a space alive with echoes. Echoes of the deceased, lingering, deliberate, aware. I ran my hand over my face, tried to steady my nerves. Logic, facts, procedure. That was all I could cling to. But the room resisted logic. The shadows resisted light. The body resisted death. It was all wrong, all impossible, and yet it was real. Another movement, almost imperceptible. A shift in the darkness near the far wall. My flashlight beam swung wildly. Nothing. Only the hum. Only the cold. Only the sense of being watched. My chest tightened. My hands shook. I wanted to leave. But I couldn't. I could not know. I knelt again beside the slab. Cold metal, cold flesh. But the sense of awareness, of presence, pressed into me. Patient, deliberate, waiting. I could almost hear whispers in rhythm with my heartbeat, fading when I tried to focus on them. And I understood then that the morgue was not empty. Not really. Not ever. The echoes of those who had died lingered, shaping the air, shifting the shadows, testing those who entered after them. I stayed there for hours, flashlight scanning every corner, documenting every observation. Nothing moved in ways I could record, but the sense of life, or something like it, was undeniable. I could feel in the floor beneath my feet, the walls around me, the hum of fluorescent lights above, presence, awareness, something beyond explanation. By the time I left, the first pale light of dawn had begun to filter through the windows. The morgue looked normal again, cold, silent, lifeless, but I could still feel it pressing against my chest, patient, deliberate, waiting. The echoes of the deceased had not left. They lingered in my mind, curling around my thoughts, shaping my memories of the night. Even now, I can remember every whisper, every flicker of shadow, every impossible twitch of the body. The morgue is quiet on paper, empty, sterile, but in reality it is alive, patient, waiting, watching. And I know if I return, the echoes will still be there. The phone rang just after midnight, sharp, insistent, cutting to the quiet hum of the station. Night shifts are always long, but the late hours stretch differently, slower, heavier, like the world is holding its breath. I picked it up, expecting the dispatcher or some routine call. Sheriff, a voice, low, strained, almost a whisper. You need to go to the property, the one near the creek. I frowned. Who's this? No answer, just breathing, uneven, ragged, distant. I could hear water, maybe wind, a faint scrape of something dragging. My hand tightened on the receiver. I need a name. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Silence. Then the whisper again. Before it's too late. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment, heart hammering. My instinct screamed, warning me to stay put. But another part, the one I can't explain, the one that has always drawn me things I shouldn't see, made me move. I grabbed my coat, flashlight, and keys and left the station. The streets were empty, shrouded in fog. Headlights cut through the mist, illuminating a town that felt unfamiliar, as if it had shifted while I wasn't looking. The property wasn't far, but the road was barely visible under the low-hanging fog. Trees leaned toward the asphalt like crooked fingers, branches scraping against my windshield. My pulse was loud in my ears. The call, the voice, the sense of urgency, it clung to me. I could almost feel eyes following from the darkness beyond the trees. I parked near the edge of the property. The land was overgrown, abandoned long enough for grass to swallow paths and fences to collapse into themselves. The house stood in the clearing like a blackened shadow, empty windows staring. I stepped out, boots crunching on wet leaves, and felt the weight of silence press down. The air smelled of damp earth and rot. I could hear the creek nearby, water running over stones, soft and steady. But there was something else, something beneath the sound, subtle, almost a vibration through the soles of my feet. A presence, waiting. I approached the front door, flashlight cutting through the dark. The wood was warped, paint peeling, hinges rusted. The lock had long since been broken. I pushed it open carefully. The inside smelled of decay, dust, and something faintly metallic. My flashlight beam revealed remnants of a life abandoned. Furniture overturned, old paper scattered, curtains ripped, but the place felt alive. Patient, watching. I moved slowly through the house, every step careful. The floorboards groaned beneath me. Shadows gathered in the corners, stretching along walls. My mind kept returning to the body from the morgue. the injuries, the strange bruises, the marks that made no sense. And now, this place, connected somehow, waiting for me to find it. A sound, soft, deliberate, made me freeze. Something moving in the upper floor. Not heavy, not deliberate, but precise. Quick, almost silent. I held my flashlight steady, sweeping across the room. Nothing, only the dark corners, the furniture leaning like crooked teeth. I swallowed hard, trying to ground myself. Rational, observation, facts, not fear. I found the staircase. It led upward, narrow, warped by years of neglect. I climbed slowly, the air growing colder with every step. The floor above smelled of mildew and rusted metal. The ceiling sagged, and shadows pooled in corners like liquid. I kept thinking of the voice on the phone, the urgency, the warning. I had to know what it meant. At the top, a long hallway stretched before me. Doors, all closed, all warped. My flashlight cut a thin path across the floor. And then I saw it, marks on the wall. Small, repeated, like scratches, running along the woodwork. Not random, intentional, fading into the shadows. My pulse spiked. Someone had been here. Or something. I moved from door to door, flashlight beam sweeping. Each room empty, decayed, silent. But there was a rhythm to the space now. A presence, just beyond my sight. Patient, watching, waiting. I could almost hear whispers, soft, fleeting, like breath against my ear. Then I found the basement door. It was small, heavy, rusted hinges barely holding. My heart sank. Something about the air around it was different. Heavier, denser. The cold pressed against my skin. I knelt and tried to handle. Locked, but the lock was fragile. With effort, it broke. The door groaned, revealing stairs leading downward into darkness. I descended carefully, flashlight cutting a path. The basement was larger than expected. Damp, stone walls, dripping water. The smell of decay was stronger here, and faintly, unmistakably metallic. I stopped. Something moved at the edge of my vision. Quick, subtle. I swung the flashlight. Nothing, only shadows. Then I saw it, the remnants of a struggle. Scuff marks on the floor, scratches along the walls, signs of life, recent and deliberate, and the footprints, small, human-like, press into the dirt that had been tracked inside from outside. They ended suddenly, as if the person or thing had vanished into the air. I felt a shiver run through me. The body from a morgue. These marks, these traces, they were connected. And someone had been here recently, alive, watching, waiting. And now I was in its space. I moved forward, flashlight shaking slightly, and noticed a small cabinet pushed into the corner. I approached cautiously. Inside, papers, old journals, faded photographs, faces frozen in time. Families, children, all gone. And then I saw the page that made my stomach drop. A note, scrawled, warning future visitors to leave, to never enter the basement, to avoid what waits. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Procedure, observation, facts. But every rational thought collided with what I was feeling. The basement, the house, the presence in the shadows. They were alive with intent. Patient, deliberate. I could feel it pressing in on me, subtle but heavy, watching, then movement again. At the far end of the basement, a shadow detached from the wall. Quick, precise. I swung my flashlight. Empty, only the corners of darkness. And yet I knew something was here. Something that didn't belong. Something connected to the body, to the injuries, to the scratches in the house. Waiting for the next step. I stepped back toward the stairs, flashlight scanning every corner. The air was thick now, almost suffocating. The presence had grown, not visible, not audible, but pressing against my chest, my thoughts, my senses. I could feel its intent. Patient, watching, judging. I retraced my steps to the front door. The night outside was quiet, fog curling around the trees. The street beyond the property looked normal, empty, mundane. And yet I could feel it, following, waiting, patient. I shivered, sliding into my truck, hands tight on the wheel. Headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the path back. Even as I drove, The feeling lingered. Shadows pressed at the edges of my vision, whispering in half-formed breaths. I glanced in the rear-view mirror. The property sat behind me, dark, silent, and patient, waiting. The unknown caller, the warning, the abandoned house, everything connected. And I understood deep down that I hadn't left it behind. I hadn't faced it fully. Not yet. And I knew, somehow, it was already aware of me, patient, deliberate, waiting. Even now, I can feel it pressing against my thoughts, a subtle insistence that some doors, once open, can never truly close. That night, the unknown caller didn't just guide me to a property. It guided me into the presence of something that had been waiting. And I know it hasn't forgotten. The drive home felt longer than usual. Fog clung to the streets, curling around the lampposts and the edges of my vision. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary. Every shadow looked like it was moving, waiting, patient. The memory of the abandoned property, the basement, the scratches and footprints pressed against my chest. I told myself it was over. I had seen enough. I had documented, observed, and left. But night doesn't end when you want it to. I pulled into my driveway. The house was dark, quiet, empty, or so I thought. The air was cold, damp, lingering fog curling between the trees. My breath hung in the air like smoke. I reached for the keys, unlocking the door slowly. Step by step, I entered, every creak of the floorboards loud in the oppressive silence. I flicked on the lights. Nothing. The living room was as I'd left it. My jacket hung on the chair, the coffee table stacked with old paperwork. I exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the tension. It's over. Nothing followed me, just fatigue and the lingering unease that clings after a long night. I set my flashlight down, moving to the kitchen. I could hear my own breathing, the faucet dripping somewhere in the house. And then I saw it, the outline, faint at first, just a shadow darker than the rest. But it was unmistakable. A body, not moving, not alive, but there, familiar. The same posture, the same stiff, frozen presence I'd seen in the morgue, in the abandoned property. Here, in my own house. My heart slammed against my ribs. I froze, unable to step closer. Rational thought fought panic. It couldn't be real. The house was empty. I live alone. And yet there it was, patient, waiting, pressing into the corners of the room. The air itself. I lifted my flashlight, hands shaking. The beam cut across the room. The outline didn't move. It didn't breathe. But it was alive in ways shadows can be alive at the edges of perception. Something conscious, deliberate, aware. My stomach twisted. I stepped closer, each movement cautious. The outline seemed to hold its place just beyond the limits of the light. The floor felt colder beneath my feet, the air thicker, heavier. I could almost hear whispers, faint, impossible, brushing the edges of my ears. I forced myself to examine the space logically. There were no footprints, no marks, no evidence that anyone had been here, and yet the presence was undeniable. I could feel it pressing against my mind, patient, deliberate, as if it had been waiting for me to return. The shadows shifted slightly. Not much, just a faint ripple along the outline, like water disturbed. I held my breath. My pulse roared in my ears. I wanted to run, to leave, but something anchored me. Something demanded I stay. I remembered the note in the abandoned property, the warnings, the scratches, the whispers. This was a continuation. The presence had followed me home, and I had no idea why. I backed away slowly, flashlight scanning every corner. The living room was empty, familiar, but the air was heavy, pressing against my chest, my shoulders, my skull, and I could feel it moving closer, patient, deliberate, unseen. I spoke, my voice low, trying to assert control. I see you. I know you're here. Nothing. Only the silence. Thick, waiting. Then a sound. Almost imperceptible. A footstep? No, too light. Closer, softer. Like a breath brushing across the floor. I turned sharply. Flashlight sweeping, but the outline remained still. Only the edges of the shadows, deep, curling, shifting just beyond the light. I remembered the body in the morgue. The injuries, the strange, deliberate markings. And now here it was worse. Not just a corpse, not just a warning. Something alive, patient, deliberate, following me, watching, waiting. I tried to rationalize it. Fatigue, imagination, the tension of night spent chasing something I can't name. But my instincts screamed at me. The air felt alive. Shadows moved when I didn't look. And the outline, it was patient, waiting, judging. I stepped toward it again. Each step felt heavier, like wading through thick air. The outline didn't change, but I could feel the weight of it pressing in, filling the room, filling my mind. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking hands. And then I saw movement, not the outline itself, but the shadows around it. They stretched, curling toward me. Subtle at first, like smoke drifting, then more deliberate. Deliberate in a way that makes you feel small, insignificant. I froze. The flashlight trembled in my grip. I whispered more to myself than anything else. "What do you want?" No answer. Only the pressing awareness, patient, deliberate. It didn't move in the way a human moves, not with steps or gestures. It moved through presence, through the air, through the weight in the room. I could feel it in my chest, my spine, my temples, and I just knew it had been waiting for me. I tried to step back. My own hallway stretched impossibly long, shadows thickening along the walls. I turned, scanning the edges with my flashlight, but everything looked normal, familiar, yet wrong. The outline shifted slightly again. Just a ripple, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that this was alive, deliberate, conscious, not bound by physics, not bound by the house. It was patient, watching, waiting. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to steady my breathing. Every logical thought collided with instinctive terror. This wasn't something I could chase away. This wasn't a problem I could solve. It was a presence, and it had followed me. I thought back to the unknown caller, the abandoned property, the morgue, the corpse with injuries that didn't make sense. All connected. And now here, patient, waiting. I realized then that my home was no longer safe. That the shadow, the outline, the pressing presence had claimed space here, and there was no simple way to remove it. I tried to focus, procedure, observation, facts, but each fact brought unease. The house was familiar, yet alive with something else. The outline remained in place. Shadows stretched, the air thickened, and I could feel it pressing into me, reminding me that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. I stepped back further, toward the stairs. The outline didn't move, but the edges of the room shifted slightly, curling shadows stretching toward me. I swallowed hard, patient, deliberate, waiting. I could feel in my chest, my lungs, my skull, and I knew somehow it had been watching me the entire time. I whispered again, voice low, strained. "I don't understand you. I don't know what you want." No answer, only presence. Only wait, only the shadows stretching, patient, deliberate, waiting. I left the flashlight on the counter, moving toward the door. The outline remained. The shadows followed subtly, curling, pressing, patient. I glanced back. The shape seemed to shift in the corner of my eye. Not moving, not alive in traditional sense, but aware, conscious, waiting. I stepped outside. Cold air hit my face, fog curling around my boots. The street was empty, normal, quiet, and yet inside the presence lingered. Patient, deliberate, watching, waiting. Even now I can feel it, lurking in the corners of my home, pressing against memory, pressing against the mind. Shadows never rest. And sometimes, even when you leave the lights on, the darkness waits. Patient, watching, waiting. I've always hated fog. Not the soft, rolling kind that blankets a valley and makes the world feel like a painting. No, I mean the kind that drags itself across the land like a living thing, heavy and silent, swallowing sound, hiding shapes that shouldn't be there. Tonight, it was thick as soup along the coast. It had that smell too, salt, rot, and something metallic underneath that made my stomach turn. The call came in just before midnight. Missing ships, not one, but two vessels that hadn't checked in with the harbor Radio silent for hours. I know the waters around here better than most, and I can tell you the currents don't just drag ships into nothing. Not normally, but something had gone wrong. Something that made the radio voice shaky, like the man speaking didn't fully believe what he was reporting. I drove my patrol car through the fog, headlights cutting nothing but a gray wall. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than I realized. I kept thinking about how quiet it was, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest, makes your ears ring, and tricks you into hearing movement where there is none. A gull cried somewhere far off, or maybe it was closer. The fog changes distance. Everything changes distance. The lighthouse appeared like a ghost. Its light spun lazily, cutting arcs through the gray. I parked at the edge of the cliff, just far enough to see the waves crash against the rocks below, white foam glowing under the faint beacon. No one was there. No keeper. Nothing but the sound of the wind tearing at the cliffs and my own boots crunching on gravel as I approached the old structure. It smelled like wet stone and oil inside. The walls were peeling paint, and the air carried a dampness that soaked straight through my coat. I called out, my voice sounding small, swallowed almost immediately by the round walls. No answer, just a light sweeping past me every few seconds, mechanical, endless, and indifferent. I remember the first time I climbed the spiral staircase. It creaks under weight and age. Each step felt like it might break off entirely. I reached the top and peered out through the fog glass windows. The ocean was nothing but gray smears. I felt like I could fall into it, into nothing and never reach the bottom. And then I saw it, or I thought I did. A ship or the shadow of one, just beyond the cliff's edge. It wasn't moving, not like a normal vessel should. The waves didn't lap against it. They seemed to curl around it, hesitant, as if the sea itself refused to touch it. My stomach dropped. My throat tightened. I grabbed the radio in my hand, but the static was loud, harsh, like someone scraping metal across my eardrum. Harbor, this is Sheriff Mallory. I can see one of the ships. It's not. My words died in static. And then I heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist here. A low, hollow rhythm, like footsteps echoing inside a steel drum. I froze. The light from the beacon swung across the cliff and caught a figure standing at the edge, staring out at the water. At first, I thought it was a keeper, but the figure was too tall, too thin. Its head tilted in a way that didn't feel human. My rational mind shouted a call for backup, to retreat, to get out. My body didn't move. The figure didn't wave, didn't blink. It just stood there, watching. Then it stepped forward, or maybe it didn't. I can't be sure. My eyes weren't reliable. Fog plays tricks. Shadows move differently when you don't expect them. And then it was gone. Just gone. I fell back against a railing. Tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, but the sea was different now. Darker, almost black, with a sheen like oil under the beacon. And the ship, it wasn't a ship. Not really. It was a shape, a smear of something solid, waiting, unmoving, as if the water itself held it there. I thought about calling it in again, telling the dispatcher that something wasn't right, but I hesitated. I've been doing this job long enough to know the words I don't know aren't allowed in reports. People expect answers. I didn't have any. The fog thickened. My breath came in short bursts. I felt like I was standing inside a bowl, everything closing in. Then I heard a whisper, not over the radio, not to the walls, but behind me, soft, almost teasing. Sheriff. I spun around, hand on my gun, but there was nothing, just the fog curling at the base of the lighthouse, curling up like fingers. My rational mind screamed again, but the whisper came a little louder, carrying a sound that felt wrong in my bones. Sheriff, come closer. I didn't. I couldn't. My heart pounded like it wanted to break free from my chest. And yet, I felt drawn toward the spiral staircase, toward the top, toward the beacon itself. I wanted to see it clearly, wanted to understand. And maybe that was a trap. I reached the top again. The windows were streaked with condensation, but I could make out the horizon, or what I thought was a horizon. The shadow was back, closer this time, the fog parting just enough to hint at its shape. It had arms too long, and I could swear its eyes, if they could be called that, were glowing faintly, reflecting the light of the beacon in a way that made me sick. I stepped back, slipped slightly, and the railing rattled under my hand. The whisper came again, clearer, right in my ear. "They're waiting." My stomach turned. My mind raced. Who? What? And why? I called out to the figure, almost desperately, my voice cracking. "Who's there? What do you want?" Silence. The wind whipped harder, shaking the lighthouse. The beacon's light swung over the ocean, over the cliff, over me, and finally rested on the shadow. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just existed. I felt my sanity teeter on the edge. The way its head turned, just slightly, unnaturally, made me feel like it knew everything I feared, every secret I'd ever tried to hide. I tried to steady myself, tried to think rationally. Maybe this was exhaustion. Maybe I'd been staring at the fog too long, letting my imagination paint shapes where there were none. But then the radio cracked, static screaming, and a voice came through, trembling. "Sheriff, are you there? We're losing them. We can't reach them." I felt a cold chill run through me. Losing them? Not just the ships. Something else. Something I didn't understand. I could feel in the air, thick and wet, pressing against my chest, whispering that whatever waited in the fog was patient. So patient. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for me. The shape blinked, or at least I think it did. And for a moment, I saw the outline of a face. Not human. Hollow, sharp, impossible. It smiled, just the corners of its mouth stretching unnaturally. And then the fog swallowed it. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and leaned against the wall. I told myself to breathe, to think, to do something normal. But normal didn't exist here. Not tonight. Not in this lighthouse. Not in this fog. I stayed at the top for a long time, listening to the wind, to the waves crashing, to the silence that followed every sound, sharper than any scream. I felt eyes on me even when the shadow was gone. The fog has a way of doing that. It makes you imagine eyes. But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. Eventually, I climbed down the spiral staircase, slowly, deliberately, trying to convince myself that the fog would hide me, that the shadow wouldn't follow me back to my car, back to the town, back to the safety of something resembling normal life. But it wasn't gone. It was there, in the corners of my vision, in the way the fog seemed thicker on the cliff, in the way the sea looked at me like it remembered me. I got in the patrol car, hands still shaking, eyes darting to the edge of the cliff. The beacon kept spinning. Its light caught the waves, caught the fog, and caught something else. Something that waited. Something patient. Something that wouldn't leave until I understood. Or until I joined them. I drove away slowly. Every mile felt like a mile through quicksand. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to answer. The missing ships, the shadow, the whisper, and that unnatural sense that everything I knew about the ocean, about the fog, about safety was a lie. By the time I reached the edge of the cliff road where the fog thinned, I dared to look back. The lighthouse stood there, silent now, except for the beacon spinning lazily. The shadow was gone. Maybe it had retreated into the fog, or maybe it had never left. And I realized something I didn't want to admit. That figure, that shape was waiting for me to return, waiting for the ships, waiting for anyone who dared to come too close. I drove back to town in silence, windows up, radio off, trying to convince myself that nothing had happened. But the fog clung to the edges of the road. It pressed against my car like a hand. And every time I blinked, I thought I saw the shadow in the periphery, just at the edge of what I could see. Smiling, patient, waiting. I know I'll have to go back. I don't know when. I don't know how. But I know the fog doesn't let go, and the lighthouse doesn't forget. And I'll be watching from the car, from the road, from the town. But I can't hide from it forever. Not from whatever waits in the fog. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Not since the lighthouse. The fog had followed me back to town. Or maybe it never left. It just hid in the corners of my mind, in the spaces between breaths. I kept turning over the events in my head, trying to make sense of shapes, whispers, and shadows. But the harder I tried, the more the pieces slipped through my fingers. Morning came pale and gray. The kind of morning that feels more like a continuation of a night than a new day. I went to the lighthouse again, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The first time I'd gone alone, but this time I carried something with me. A notebook, a pen, a sense that I needed proof, something to pin the shadows down, even if only in words. The door was still open. I should have taken that as a warning. But curiosity is a heavier weight than fear when your mind refuses to let go. I stepped inside, the smell of wet stone and oil hitting me immediately. The spiral staircase seemed smaller now, cramped, oppressive. I climbed slowly, trying to listen to the creaks of the stairs over the pounding of my own heart. At the top, I went straight to the keeper's desk. It was covered in journals, stacked haphazardly. Some were yellowed, some black with age, edges fraying, covers cracked. I opened the first one, fingers trembling, and the words inside were neat but frantic. They told of nightly apparitions, strange lights, shadows moving against the fog, whispers that spoke of danger, warnings that felt like they came from everywhere and nowhere at once. I read line after line, and I felt the same cold dread settle in my chest that I felt when I first saw the shape on the cliff. One passage caught me. They watch, always, from the fog, from the water. They know, and they try to tell us, but the living cannot always hear. I swallowed hard. My pulse rattled in my ears. I flipped to another journal. The entries were older, the handwriting shakier. One sentence repeated often, "The light shows a way, but only if you are ready to see." I stared at those words for a long time, letting them sink into me. The light, the beacon. It wasn't just a warning. It was a guide, or a trap. I couldn't tell which. The more I read, the more I realized the keeper had seen the same things I had. Not just the missing ships, but the shapes in the fog, the way the sea seemed to resist them, the voices that whispered from nowhere. The journals described the shadows as patient, intelligent, watching, and sometimes the entries hinted that they were trying to communicate, try and prevent something worse, something unseen. I put the notebook down and looked out the window. The fog had returned, thicker now, curling against the lighthouse like a living thing. I could feel it pressing against the glass, trying to reach me, and then I saw a flicker of light on the water, small, distant, pulsing in a rhythm almost like breathing. I knew it wasn't the beacon. That was steady, indifferent, mechanical. This was alive. I took a deep breath and opened another journal. It was heavier, bound in leather, and the pages smelled like salt and decay. The handwriting was cramped, almost as if the writer had been hiding from something while writing. The entries described events that were impossible to ignore. Lights appearing on the water, figures in the fog warning of unseen dangers, sometimes leading the keepers to wrecked ships, sometimes guiding them away from cliffs. The author had seen the same shapes I had. They had been trying to understand them, to communicate, to survive. One entry made me stop cold. They are not what you think. They do not want to harm, but they cannot stop what comes. Watch the light. Follow it. Do not turn away. They speak only in silence, in glances, in shadows. My hands were shaking. I closed the journal and pressed my forehead to the desk. Silence surrounded me, heavy and oppressive. The lighthouse didn't creak anymore. The wind outside had fallen still. Even the fog seemed to be holding its breath. And then I heard it, the faintest whisper, almost like a sigh through the cracks of the walls. I froze. My mind wanted to rationalize it, to tell myself it was the wind, the structure settling my own imagination. But I knew better. It sounded like the journals, like the voices described within. A warning, or a plea. I left the desk and walked slowly to the center of the top room. My eyes darted over the windows, trying to pierce the fog. My heart felt like it was crawling up my throat. And then I saw them, small shapes, flickering, moving just beyond the cliff. They weren't solid, not exactly, more like reflections or illusions, dancing over the waves and patterns I couldn't understand. But they were deliberate, and I knew, somehow, they were trying to tell me something. I wanted to look away. I wanted to turn my back and run, but I couldn't. My legs were rooted to the floor. I watched as the shapes pulsed in time with a light I couldn't explain. And then the whispers returned, louder this time, but still distant. carried on nothing I could identify as wind or echo. See, follow, do not stray. I took a notebook from my coat and started writing, describing what I saw, what I felt, trying to capture it before it disappeared. Words seemed inadequate, but I had no choice. I had to record it, even if no one would ever believe me, even if I couldn't explain it myself. The shapes shifted suddenly, and then they vanished, just like that, gone. The fog closing again, thick and impenetrable. I was left staring at nothing, the empty ocean, the gray sky. My hands were slick with sweat. My chest burned. My mind raced. What did I just witness? What did it mean? And why did I feel like I had been warned of something worse than missing ships? Worse than shadows? Worse than me? I turned back to the journals. The entries were filled with frustration, despair, and sometimes hope. Hope that someone would understand. Hope that someone would see what they had seen. I felt a strange kinship with whoever had written them. Fear that wasn't mine alone, but shared across decades of keepers, sheriffs, watchers. The fog, the shapes, the voices they had been waiting, watching, trying to guide, trying to prevent some disaster I could barely comprehend. I sat at the desk and let the journals lie open in front of me. I didn't move for what felt like hours. Listening, waiting, the fog outside still pressed against the glass. The ocean was silent now, almost too quiet, and the wind whispered in soft, teasing waves. I realized that the light of the beacon had a rhythm, not mechanical, not indifferent, almost like a heartbeat, and I thought I understood in a vague, terrible way what the journals meant. The light wasn't just warning of danger, it was signaling, communicating, guiding. But guiding whom? And what? I felt a cold pressure in my chest, the kind that makes it hard to breathe, that makes the world feel heavier than it should, the kind that tells you the boundaries between what's safe and what's not or thinner than you ever imagined. And I understood something I didn't want to. The lighthouse, the fog, the shapes, the voices, they were alive. Not in the way we think of life. Not breathing, not eating, not speaking with our mouths. But aware, patient, watching, waiting. I left the top room eventually. My footsteps were careful, slow, the spiral staircase groaned beneath me. But I paid no attention. I couldn't stop thinking about the journals, about the shapes, about the whispers. I felt like I was walking inside a dream that had its own rules, and every step I took pulled me deeper into something I wasn't sure I could ever escape. Back on solid ground, I paused at the door. The fog was thinner here, but no less menacing. I looked out at the cliff, at the sea. The shapes were gone. The light of the beacon cut through the mist, steady now, mechanical, but I knew it wasn't the same. The light had a rhythm, a memory, a warning, and I was part of it now, whether I wanted to be or not. I walked back to my car. The journals were with me. I had to take them. I had to understand. I had to try. And as I drove away, the lighthouse shrinking in my rear view mirror, I felt the whisper follow me, not through the radio, not from the walls, but inside my own head, a soft insistence that I couldn't ignore. See, follow, do not stray. I didn't look back again, but I knew I would. Sooner or later, the fog would rise again and the light would call, and I would have to answer, because the journals made it clear, in words written by hands trembling decades before mine. The lighthouse doesn't forget. The shapes don't forget. And whatever waits beyond the fog, whatever watches from the water, it won't stop. Not until it's sure I understand. The storm hit before I could even reach the lighthouse. Rain came down in sheets, blurring the edges of the road, turning the cliffs into a gray smear that threatened to swallow my car whole. The wind tore at the doors, rattled the windows, and carried a sound that felt like whispers riding on its back. I knew I shouldn't have come tonight. I knew better. But some part of me, the part that had stared at the journals and seen the shapes in the fog, refused to stay away. Lightning split the sky, harsh and sudden, illuminating the cliff's edge for a brief second. In that flash, I saw the lighthouse standing stark against the gray horizon. Its beacon spun lazily, almost careless, but the light felt different tonight. Warmer, deeper, almost like it remembered. And then the storm swallowed it again. I parked on the gravel, boots sinking slightly in the wet. The air was electric, charged with the promise of danger. I ran toward the lighthouse, my coat soaked instantly, hair plastered to my forehead. The door swung open before I even reached it, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the smell hit me first. Wet stone, oil, decay. The air was thick, pressing against my lungs. And then I heard the voice, soft, distant, almost hidden under the roar of the storm. "Sheriff." I froze, heart hammering. My hands tightened around the railing of the spiral staircase. The voice was familiar, or at least it should have been familiar. And then I saw him, the last keeper. I had read about him in the journals. The one who had vanished decades ago. The one who had written frantic warnings about the fog and the shapes, the light and the whispers. And there he was, standing at the top of the staircase, looking at me. His coat was soaked, hair plastered to his skull, eyes wide and hollow. Not alive, not dead, somewhere in between. I wanted to speak, to call out, to ask if he was real, but my mouth wouldn't move. I could only stare, frozen. He lifted a hand, pointing toward the windows. The beacon light swept across the storm outside, catching the spray of the sea in a way that made it glow like fire. And I understood. He was showing me something. The journals hadn't prepared me for this. Not the warnings, not the stories, not the careful descriptions of shapes and voices. This was immediate, alive, a presence that pressed against my chest, tight and cold. The storm outside felt less threatening than the stillness inside the lighthouse. Then he spoke again, voice trembling, carried on the wind that somehow didn't touch me. "They are closer. You will see. You must see." I stepped forward, or maybe I didn't. My memory of that moment is fragmented, like shards of glass pressed against my brain. The light swung over the sea again, and I caught glimpses of shapes, moving differently than the waves. They weren't part of the storm. They weren't reflections. They were deliberate, watching, waiting. The last keeper's eyes bore into mine. Hollow, sunken, but aware, he took a step back, fading slightly, like mist being pulled into the storm itself. "Do not look away," he whispered. And then he was gone. Just gone. The air trembled in the space he had occupied, and I realized the temperature had dropped sharply. My breath came out in ragged clouds. Even though I knew the room wasn't that cold, I ran to the windows, peering through the rain and the fog. The shapes were out there, closer now, glinting in the light of the beacon. I could make out forms that were almost human, twisted and elongated, moving in ways that made my stomach churn. And I realized they were waiting for something. Not the ships, not the storm. Me. I stumbled back, hands pressed against the wet stone walls. My mind screamed at me to leave, to get out before I became part of whatever this was. But curiosity, fear, and something deeper, something I didn't want to name, kept me rooted. The journals had warned me. Yes, but the experience was beyond words, beyond understanding. Then the whisper returned, surrounding me this time. Not one voice, but many, layered over each other, overlapping, echoing. See, follow, do not stray. The storm intensified. Thunder cracked, shaking the lighthouse. Lightning illuminated the cliff again. And in that moment, I thought I saw the keeper standing outside on the edge of the cliff, reaching toward me. Or was it the shapes? The fog shifted in the light, creating illusions that my mind couldn't separate from reality. I felt like I was teetering on a knife's edge between understanding and madness. I stumbled to the desk, grabbing the nearest journal, flipping pages frantically. The entries mirrored what I was seeing, describing moments like this. Visions of keepers, storms, shapes in the fog, warnings delivered in whispers and light. The keeper had experienced this. I realized, felt it, lived it, and vanished. I pressed my face to the journal, trying to anchor myself, trying to prove that this was real, that it was not just my imagination. The words jumped off the page, frantic, pleading, almost alive. The light will guide you. Do not turn from it. They do not wish to harm, yet harm comes if ignored. Listen, watch, follow. I could feel the shapes moving closer, though I couldn't see them clearly. The beacon cut arcs through the storm, illuminating the waves, illuminating pieces of something I couldn't comprehend. And every time the light passed over the water, I thought I glimpsed the keeper again, a shadow at the edge of perception, warning me silently, insistently, tragically. My hand shook as I scribbled notes, trying to describe the shapes, the rhythm of the light, the whispers, but the words felt inadequate. Nothing I wrote could contain the sensation of being watched, of being understood and not understood at once, of knowing that reality itself was thinner here, bending around the storm and the lighthouse and the fog. Then the whisper became a voice I recognized, a single tone cutting to the layered murmurs. "Do not leave. Not yet." I looked up, and the room was empty, no keeper, no shapes, just the storm, the spinning beacon, the fog pressing against the windows. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run back to the car, to safety, to the illusion of normalcy, but my feet didn't move. I realized I had crossed a line. Once you see the shapes, once you hear the whispers, once you feel the pull of the lighthouse, you can't step back entirely. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time no longer had meaning. The storm raged on, relentless, and the fog clung to the cliff like a living thing. The shapes returned, fleeting, glimpsed only in the corners of my vision. The beacon light swung across the ocean in arcs that felt deliberate, precise, like a message I was only beginning to decode. I thought about the last keeper, about his disappearance, about the journals, and I understood, in a faint, terrible way, why he vanished. The fog, the shapes, the light, they demanded attention, demanded acknowledgement. And if you refused, if you looked away, they had a way of erasing you from the world, or at least in the world you think you know. I don't know how long I stood there. The storm began to wane slowly, the thunder retreating, the wind weakening. The shapes faded with it, melting into the fog. The lighthouse seemed to sigh, the beacon spinning more slowly, almost peacefully. But I couldn't shake the image of the keeper, his eyes, his hand pointing, the desperate urgency in his posture, warning me, guiding me, pleading. When I finally climbed down the staircase, legs like jelly beneath me, I felt the full weight of the storm's aftermath. The lighthouse was quiet now, almost serene. The journals lay scattered on the desk, open, as if waiting for me to return. And I knew I would, because the experience had changed something in me, had made me part of it, part of the rhythm of light and fog and shadow. I stepped outside into the storm's remnants. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The fog clung to the cliff, swirling in slow currents. The ocean roared softly, the waves curling over rocks with patient persistence. And I knew that whatever had haunted me tonight, the keeper, the shapes, the whispers, they weren't gone. They would return. They would wait, and I would have to face them again. Driving back the fog, headlights cutting narrow paths of gray. I felt the whisper in my mind again. Not a threat, not quite a warning. Something in between. See, follow, do not stray. I gripped the wheel tighter. The storm's remnants pressed against my car like a hand. The lighthouse disappeared behind me. But the memory of its light stayed. The rhythm of the beacon, the pulse of the shapes, the warning of the last keeper. They were part of me now. And I understood, in a way I wish I didn't. The vanishing point isn't a place. It's a moment, a choice, a realization. And one day, I might step too far. But not tonight. Not tonight. I hate driving this road at night. Not because it's dangerous in the usual way with potholes or sharp turns, but because it doesn't behave like the rest of the world. The asphalt stretches endlessly, gray and featureless, swallowed by trees that lean too close, like they're trying to hear your heartbeat. Every few miles, the fog rolls in not gradually, but suddenly pressing in like a wall. And every time I drive it, I feel the weight of what's been lost here. They say cars have disappeared along this stretch for decades. Not crashes, not runaways, just vanished. Families, commuters, delivery trucks. One moment they're there, the next nothing. Stories like that tend to become folklore, passed from sheriff to deputy, like a warning no one dares investigate too closely. But I've been here long enough to know it isn't just a story. The silence has a memory. The road remembers. Tonight, I drive alone. The radio hums with static, occasionally catching a faint song from a station that shouldn't exist anymore. I grip the wheel tighter than I mean to. The headlights pierce only a few feet ahead before the fog swallows the beam. The mirrors reflect nothing but darkness, nothing but trees pressed close, like eyes following me. It started raining lightly just past mile marker 12. The drops hit the windshield in irregular patterns, some larger than others, bouncing off the wipers in unpredictable rhythms. I slowed because this road punishes speed differently. It feels different the further you drive, the further away the world you know seems to get, until the road itself feels like it exists outside time. I remember the first time I drove it at night. I was new, eager, foolish. A call had come in about a stalled truck. The fog was thick then, too, like it had been waiting for me. I remember seeing the headlights in the distance, approaching fast. And then nothing. No accident. No crash. Just the truck gone, like it had been swallowed whole. The witnesses, the ones who called in, never seemed to notice. Or maybe they didn't want to. Some disappearances leave scars you can't see. Tonight, I feel that same weight pressing in. I glance in the rearview mirror, expecting to see a shadow, a flicker of headlights that shouldn't be there. But there's nothing. Just fog, just trees, just the endless stretch of asphalt. My hands tighten on the wheel until my knuckles ache. And then I hear it, a faint hum beneath the tires, or maybe in my chest. Low, rhythmic, almost mechanical. I tell myself it's the car or the tires against wet asphalt, but it isn't. It doesn't match the pattern of the rain, doesn't match the engine. It's something else, something waiting, something aware. I pass an old sign, rusted and half fallen. Welcome to Callahan Pass. The letters are barely legible, eaten away by decades of wind and moisture. A town that hasn't existed for 50 years. But the road remembers it, and I feel it too, like a pulse under the asphalt, faint but insistent, like the road is alive, watching, recording. The fog thickens suddenly. I can see only a few feet in front. The headlights pierce the gray, but it's meaningless. Shapes flit at the edges of my vision. Trees, maybe, or something that mimics them. My pulse races, my throat tightens. I try to focus on the lines of the road, the reflective markers, anything familiar. But familiarity fades quickly here. Even my own breathing feels loud, intrusive, betraying me to whatever waits in the fog. I pass a bend where the road drops slightly, edges falling away into shadows I can't name. And I see it, or think I do. A car, abandoned, headlights still on, soaked in rain, reflecting like it's been here forever. My stomach drops. I know no car should be there. The stories, the warnings, every missing vehicle I've ever read about, they flash through my mind. I slow, heart hammering, and the instant I do, it's gone. Just gone. No skid marks, no debris, nothing. I can't even tell if I imagined it, but I know I didn't. I grip the wheel tighter. The hum returns, louder now, almost like a voice, but not. Just a vibration under the seat, under my ribs, under the asphalt itself. I tell myself it's the road, that it's the rain, that it's me, but part of me knows better. Part of me has felt it before, watching, patient, waiting. The rain falls harder. The fog presses closer. The headlights catch glimpses of things that shouldn't be there, shapes in the trees, shadows in the mist, glimmers of metal that vanish when I blink. I feel it again, the pull, the road urging me forward. Forward to somewhere I don't want to be. Forward to something I can't name. I pass a mile marker I know shouldn't exist. Number 42. This road ends at 41. And yet there it is, standing in the fog, wet and leaning slightly, as if it had grown out of the earth itself. A chill runs down my spine. I slow again. My hands shake. And for a moment, I swear I see movement, a reflection in the rain-slick asphalt. Someone or something, standing just at the edge of the fog, watching, waiting. I tell myself to breathe, to keep going, to make it to the next town, the next turn, the next sign of normal life. But the road doesn't let you forget. Every mile stretches, every shadow deepens. I think of the cars that vanished, of the families, of the drivers who never arrived. And I realize the road isn't just a road. It's a trap, a record, a place that doesn't let go. The rain slaps harder now. The wind cuts through the car, sharp and insistent, and the hum becomes a pulse. I can feel in my fingers on the wheel, in my knees, in the pit of my stomach. The fog parts slightly, and I see the road ahead shimmer, like heat on asphalt in summer. But wrong. Wrong for the cold, wrong for the night. And then I see them, shadows stretching, elongated, moving with purpose. Not the trees, not the fog. Something aware, something waiting for me to see. I grip the wheel until my knuckles hurt. I can't turn back. I can't stop. Not here. Not now. Every instinct screams at me to flee. But the road isn't letting me go. I feel it beneath me, pressing, recording, shaping my fear into something I can't name. Then the headlights catch it, or them glimmers of metal, fragments of shapes that shouldn't exist. Cars, maybe, or echoes of cars. I can't tell, but I know they were lost here once, decades ago, and I am seeing what remains. Not bodies, not wreckage, but the essence of disappearance itself. Like the road remembers what was taken and shows it fragment by fragment. If you dare to look, my pulse races. I blink and the shapes fade. Just fog, just trees, just the endless black ribbon of asphalt, but the memory of them lingers. The way the headlights reflected off something impossible, the way the fog shifted unnaturally around them. I feel their presence, patient and unblinking, recording my fear. I drive on, silent, listening only to the hum, only to the rain, only to the pulse beneath the tires. I know I won't sleep after this. I know I'll remember every inch of this road forever. And I know that when I drive it again, when I am forced to, the shadows will be waiting. The hum will return. The road will press in again, insistent, recording, patient. By the time I reach the end, the town lights dimly appearing through mist. I feel like I have aged 10 years. The fog thins. The hum fades. The trees retreat. And yet, I know the road remembers me now. My pulse, my fear, my doubt, every second of it. It doesn't let go, and I can't leave it behind. I park at the edge of town, hands still shaking, mind racing. The radio crackles with static again. I want to turn it on, listen to something familiar, something mundane. But I don't, because the road has filled my head with whispers, with pulses, with shadows that aren't there but always are. And I know, as I sit in silence, drenched and trembling, that the midnight patrol isn't about law. It's about survival, about keeping the memory of what's been lost alive enough to remember. Because the road will take you if you forget. It will wait, and it will show you, slowly, deliberately, what it means to vanish. I don't drive this road lightly anymore. Not at night, not alone, not without knowing that every curve, every mile, every shadow in the fog is alive, and that it is waiting for you to look. I've looked, and now it knows I have. The fog came without warning. One moment the road was empty, wet and familiar. The next, it pressing around me like a living wall, gray and suffocating. Headlights barely cut through it. The edges of the trees disappeared, their twisted branches swallowed in mist. Every mile I drove, the fog seemed thicker, heavier, as if it were concentrating, waiting for something or someone. I slowed my patrol car to almost nothing, but it didn't matter. The fog had a way of changing distance. The lines on the road seemed to dissolve, stretching out ahead in impossible ways, and I felt that old, familiar dread creeping in, the kind that tells you the world you know has stopped, replaced with something older, patient, indifferent to human fear. That's when I saw it. Tracks, not tire marks, not hoof prints, not any pattern I could name. Just impressions in the asphalt, wide and deep, curling in patterns that didn't make sense. I stopped the car, heart hammering, and leaned forward to study them. They didn't follow the road exactly. They veered toward the edges, toward shadows that didn't exist in the dim light. I ran a gloved hand along one of the indentations. Cold, wet, but not from rain. Something else had left it there, something deliberate. I backed the car up a few feet to get a better look, and then I saw the belongings scattered along the foggy shoulder. A small suitcase, cracked leather, soaked through. A child's shoe, the color faded by years or sun or rain. I couldn't tell. A coat, turned inside out, its pockets empty. Whoever had left them, or whatever had left them, wasn't here anymore. but I felt their presence in the air, heavy and pressing, watching. I stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the wet road, fog curling around my legs like fingers. I could barely see my hands in front of me. I want to call it in, to have backup, to bring light, to name what I was seeing. But the radio crackled only static. No station, no voice, nothing. The fog had swallowed sound just like it swallowed sight. I picked up the suitcase. It was heavier than it looked, damp and moldy, with the smell of decay inside. I opened it, half expecting, no, half fearing what I might find. But it was empty, just empty fabric and that vague, lingering scent of human presence. My stomach turned. The tracks, the belongings, all pointing to something or someone that had vanished entirely. I moved along the edge of the road, following the strange impressions in the asphalt. They twisted and curled in impossible ways, crossing over themselves, sometimes leading toward the ditch, sometimes toward the middle of the lane. I felt a pull, subtle, insistent, like the road itself was guiding me. But guiding to what? That question clawed at the back of my mind with every step. The fog shifted, or maybe I shifted. It's hard to know which when everything around you is uncertain. Shadows appeared, long, thin, stretched impossibly by the diffused light of the patrol car. I thought I saw figures at the edges of the fog, glimpses of something moving, but every time I blinked, they vanished. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but I've been driving this road long enough to know that sometimes the mind isn't lying. Sometimes it's seeing more than you want to see. I found more belongings. A backpack, ripped at the seams. A child's toy, soaked and colorless in the rain. A watch, cracked glass reflecting nothing but gray. The things didn't belong to anyone alive here now. They belonged to whatever had walked these miles before me. And I could feel the weight of those miles pressing into my chest. Each item a memory, a warning, a record of absence. I wanted to turn back. The fog made it impossible to see where I had come from, where I was going. The road behind me was just gray and wet. And then I heard it, a sound so faint I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. Something dragging across the asphalt, slow, heavy, measured, somewhere behind me, just beyond the edge of the fog. My pulse spiked. My hands shook on the patrol car. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to see. The dragging sound stopped. The fog thickened even more, curling around the patrol car, around me, around belongings. And I saw them, or I think I did. Shapes at the edge of the fog, small and indistinct, moving just slightly, watching, waiting. Not human, not fully. I couldn't name what I was seeing, couldn't define the outline or the size, only that it existed and it had eyes, patient, unblinking, observing me as I observed the empty objects it had left behind. I stepped back toward the car, heart hammering, and the fog shifted again. I caught glimpses of tracks where there had been none, deeper impressions in the asphalt, twisting and curling in impossible patterns. The road itself seemed to pulse under my feet, alive and aware. I felt it pressing into me, insistent, urging me to follow. And for a moment, I understood why the cars had disappeared, why people had vanished without trace. This place doesn't just take you. It watches, it guides, and if you look too long, if you linger, it claims a piece of you. I tried to rationalize. Maybe the tracks were natural. Maybe the belongings had been dumped by someone else, lost in the fog. But logic felt thin, fragile, as though it might snap at any second. The fog doesn't care for logic. It doesn't care for reason. It only cares for presence. And I was here. I followed the tracks slowly, each step a negotiation with fear. The belongings grew more frequent, more deliberate. A torn jacket, a half-empty bag, a hat. They weren't random. They weren't discarded. They were placed, left as markers or warnings, or reminders of what had come before. And I knew, deep in my chest, that whatever had left them had intended for me to see. The fog pressed closer. My skin felt wet, cold, and slick even through my coat. The shapes at the edge of perception shifted again. I thought I caught the glint of eyes reflecting the dim light, but every time I turned fully, they were gone. I felt the same tug in my chest I felt on the road before, that subtle pull that told me this wasn't just a road. It was alive, a living memory of absence and disappearance. I wanted to leave. I told myself I had to leave. But every step back toward the car felt longer than it should, stretched by the fog, pulled by something I could not name. And then I heard it again, that dragging sound. Behind me, closer this time. Not fast, not sudden, just deliberate, heavy, measured, and it didn't stop. I ran, wet asphalt slipping under my boots, my patrol car like a beacon ahead, taunting me, promising safety. But the fog refused to release me. Every step forward felt like moving through molasses, and in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a shape trailing me, elongated, distorted, aware of every step. It didn't chase. It didn't run. It simply followed, patiently, indifferently, and I knew I couldn't outrun it. I reached the car, slammed the door, locked it, and pressed my forehead against the wheel. The dragging stopped. The fog swirled, shifting, pulling at the edges of the asphalt, but nothing moved now, nothing visible, and yet I could feel it. I could feel the memory of the tracks, the weight of the abandoned belongings, the patient shapes watching from the gray. I started the engine. The patrol car hummed, tires spitting water, headlights cutting narrow paths through the fog. I drove slowly, every sense on edge, every shadow, every ripple in the mist, every reflection in the wet road felt alive. I couldn't shake the feeling that the road was observing me, recording my fear, measuring my attention, and I knew the fog would follow me for miles, maybe for days, waiting until I returned, waiting until I lingered too long again. I thought of the missing cars, the drivers who had vanished, the families who had never returned, and I understood faintly, terrifyingly why. They hadn't left. Not really. They had been claimed, marked, recorded by the fog, the road, the patient shapes that haunted the stretch of asphalt. And now, so had I. By the time I reached the edge of the fog, the sun rising faintly behind clouds I couldn't see through, I was shaking, my uniform soaked, my hands raw, and I knew I wouldn't be able to forget this stretch, these tracks, these belongings. The fog had left a piece of itself in me, as patient and relentless as it had been for decades. I parked at the edge of town, took a deep breath, and tried to convince myself it was over, but I knew better. The road doesn't release its memories easily. The fog doesn't forgive. And the next time I drive it, I'll see the shapes again. I'll see the tracks. I'll see the things left behind for me to remember. Because this road, this fog, this stretch of asphalt, it never forgets. And neither will I. The forest starts quietly, deceptively calm. You drive into it, and at first, it seems like any other stretch of road. Tall pines, maples, oaks pressed close together, branches tangled overhead. But the deeper you go, the more you realize it isn't calm at all. It's waiting, patient, silent, except for the occasional creak of wood in the wind, and it watches. I noticed it first while driving home from a late patrol. The fog hadn't reached this far yet, but the air felt thicker, heavier. My headlights bounced off wet leaves, reflecting in ways that made the branches seem alive, twisting. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, nerves from too many long nights. But then I saw the shapes. At first, I thought they were travelers, people leaning against the trees, watching the road. My first thought was relief. They weren't waiting for me, just ordinary hikers maybe. But the shapes didn't move like humans. Their limbs were stiff, their faces blurred. The light from the headlights caught them at strange angles, and I noticed they were too still, too symmetrical, too deliberate. I slowed, heart hammering. My pulse felt loud in my ears, matching the engine's hum. I tried to blink them away, but every glance brought the same shapes into focus. Branches and bark twisted unnaturally, forming faces. Faces that mimicked me. Faces that mimicked the passengers I'd seen years ago on this road. Gone now, never found. I remember gripping the wheel tighter, knuckles white, telling myself I was tired, that it was exhaustion, that this forest was playing tricks on me. But the air didn't feel like exhaustion. It felt aware, attentive, aware of my pulse, my fear, my very presence. The first face I saw was a man. He leaned against a pine just off the road, head tilted like he was studying me, Or maybe mocking me, or warning me. I couldn't tell. I squinted through the headlight's glow, and the face flickered as if the tree itself exhaled and reshaped the bark. The eyes, deep hollows wet with shadow, followed me as I moved. I blinked and they were gone, not hidden by the branches, gone entirely. I took a deep breath and pressed onward, telling myself it didn't matter. It was just the forest, just a fog that would eventually roll in, shaping everything into something strange. Just my imagination. But the road ahead felt wrong, thicker somehow. The air pressed against the windshield, not with moisture, but with weight, with intent. And then I saw more faces. Children this time, small and blurred, huddled near tree trunks, peering out from shadows, their features twisted, not in grotesque anger, but in mimicry, mimicking the fear in me. And I realized that this forest wasn't just watching, it was learning, recording, reflecting, waiting. I parked the car at the edge of a clearing, the headlights cutting swaths of light into the shadows. I wanted to leave. I wanted to drive home, to turn around, to escape the suffocating sense that I was not alone. But my feet were glued to the pedals, my eyes drawn deeper into the forest, pulled toward the shadows that grew more deliberate with each second. The trees shifted, or maybe they hadn't. Maybe it was me shifting. Everything blurred, faces materialized in knots of bark, in twisted roots, in leaves that clung unnaturally to branches. They weren't full humans, not exactly, but they mimicked the shapes of travelers. My chest tightened, my stomach roiled. I felt like I had walked into a hall of mirrors, but the mirrors were alive, and they remembered me. A voice whispered somewhere in the dark, not through the car speakers, not through the radio, just in my mind, soft, patient, carrying a weight I couldn't identify. They remember, they wait, they follow. I wanted to run, I wanted to leave, but the forest pressed in, like the trees themselves were leaning closer, listening, seeing, learning. Every shadowed hollow became a face. Every nodding would a mimic of my own features, twisted and stretched. I felt my own fear reflected back at me 100 times over, multiplied. I climbed out of the car, hands shaking. The gravel crunched under my boots, loud in the near silence. I took one careful step forward, and a face formed immediately in the nearest tree. Mine, the eyes wide, hollow, reflecting the light from my own flashlight. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled backward. The face didn't vanish. It stayed, waiting, patient, indifferent. I spun the flashlight around, searching for movement, for the source, for anything solid. The shadows shifted with me, reorganizing, mimicking my gestures, recording my hesitation, my fear. And the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a forest. This was a trap. Not for bodies. Not yet. For minds. For awareness. For the fragile edge between sanity and obsession. I thought about the people who had disappeared along this stretch of road. The patrol logs I had read. The stories whispered in the station. Did they see this too? Or had they looked away? Had they refused to see? And in that refusal, been claimed differently? The thought made my skin crawl. A branch shifted above me. A low groan, almost like a sigh, escaped from the trees. And then another face emerged, small, twisted, almost childlike, mimicking my posture as I crouched in shock. I could see the outline of my own shoulders, my head, reflected in bark and shadow. And for a long moment, it felt alive. Not wood, not matter, not even fully formed, but something aware, something watching. I ran back to the car, fumbled with the keys. The forest didn't follow in a literal sense, but I could feel it pressing against me, pressing into me, like the air itself carried the eyes of 1,000 mimicries. Every glance in the mirrors reflected faces. Every shadow between headlights became a watcher. I slammed the door and locked it, chest heaving. The forest didn't retreat. The mist began to curl around the car, slow and deliberate, filling in the spaces between trees, softening edges, making the forest infinite. I could feel the pulse of it beneath the tires, beneath the gravel, beneath the road itself, a living memory of every traveler who had come before, every fear, every hesitation, every glance away. I turned the car slowly, inch by inch, headlights scanning the edges of the road. Faces appeared in the branches and the roots, in every shadow. They didn't move like humans, not quite. They shifted unnaturally, adapting, mimicking, learning. And I realized I could never truly leave this forest. Not completely. Part of it would stay with me. Part of its awareness would cling to my mind, recording my heartbeat, my fear, my acknowledgement. I drove, slowly. Every mile of the asphalt stretched longer than it should. Every shadow pressed closer. The faces watched, patient, indifferent, eternal. I could feel them not just in the trees, but in the fog that began to roll in from the valley, curling around the edges of the headlights. They were everywhere now, and the road would carry them forward. If only I didn't forget. The radio crackled, nothing but static. I tried to change the station. Nothing. I turned it off. Silence pressed in, thicker than the fog. I told myself I was imagining it all, that the forest was just old, twisted trees, and the shapes were bark and knots in shadow. But deep down I knew better. I had seen too much, felt too much. The faces in the trees weren't just illusions. They were memory. They were awareness. They were patient, waiting. By the time the fog thinned slightly near the next mile marker, I was shaking, hands white on the wheel, eyes raw from scanning, my pulse hammering in my throat. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe loud. I didn't dare, because I knew the forest could see, could hear, could record. It had claimed a part of me tonight, whether I admitted it or not. I reached the edge of the forest, trees thinning, the road returning to normal asphalt, the fog retreating into the distance. But I didn't feel safe. Not really. I knew the faces would linger. In the next patrol, in the mirrors, in the shadows of the next road I drove. In my own mind, I parked at the edge of town, sitting in the patrol car, hands still shaking, staring at the road behind me. The sun hadn't risen yet. The fog lingered faintly, teasing the edges of the forest. And I knew I would return. I would have to, because the faces, the trees, the awareness, the mimicry, they didn't forgive absence. They waited, and they always remembered. The forest doesn't forget, and neither will I. I thought leaving would be simple. Just drive. Headlights cutting to the dark, tires humming over asphalt, and the road behind me shrinking into distance. But that night, it wasn't simple. Not this road. Not anymore. The moment I turned onto it, I felt the air change. Not the fog, not the rain, not even the chill. It was heavier, pressing, as if the asphalt itself had weight, as if it wanted something from me. The road stretched ahead, black and infinite, but the edges, the shoulders, the trees, the ditches, they felt alive, watching, waiting. I tried to tell myself it was fatigue. Long shifts, long nights, too many miles alone. My pulse rattled in my chest. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. The headlights cut swaths into the darkness, illuminating familiar curves and dips. And yet, every mile felt longer than it should. Every shadow stretched farther. Every reflection in the wet asphalt shimmered strangely, like heat over desert pavement. Then I noticed it, a shape on the side of the road. At first, I thought a deer had wandered out, but it didn't move like an animal. It didn't move at all, just stood or leaned there perfectly still, its outline blurred slightly in the darkness, like it wasn't fully solid. I slowed, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed to turn, to leave, to ignore it, but I couldn't. My eyes were glued. The shape mirrored me, not perfectly, but close enough. My posture, my hands, my jacket, and in the dim reflection of my headlights, I thought I saw its face twist, a fleeting movement almost human, almost alive. My chest tightened. I swallowed hard. My voice didn't work. My pulse was the only sound I could hear, echoing in the silence around me. I passed it unwillingly. The tires on wet asphalt, the hum of the engine, the slight slosh of rainwater. Everything felt muted. The headlights revealed the road ahead, empty, but the moment I glanced in the rear view mirror, it was there again. Same spot, same shape, still watching. Panic crawled into my chest, slow and deliberate. I tried to rationalize. Perhaps it was a trick of shadows, perhaps fatigue, perhaps memory mixing with imagination. But the shapes along this road had taught me better. This place doesn't lie. It waits, it watches, and it remembers. I pushed the car harder, engine roaring against my nerves. I thought I could outrun it, escape, but the road stretched endlessly. The trees on either side seemed to lean closer, bending the edges of the asphalt like they were corralling me. My headlights illuminated familiar curves. And yet, every bend seemed to return me to the same stretch, a loop I couldn't name, a road that refused to end. And then the phenomenon began. The sky, heavy and black moments before, split with a light I couldn't place. Not moonlight, not lightning. Something else. A pale wash that seemed to come from nowhere, illuminating the road with unnatural clarity. And in that light, the road multiplied. Not in the way shadows stretch or mirrors reflect. No, it split, fracturing into paths that led nowhere, all identical, all infinite. My hand shook on the wheel. I blinked. The road behind me stretched longer than it had seconds before. The same curve repeated. The same dip. The same shoulder, lined with shadows that mimicked shapes I'd seen before. Children, men, women, all faceless now, watching, waiting. The more I looked, the more I realized the road didn't just stretch. It multiplied. It expanded, as though the asphalt itself was a living thing, folding space, refusing my departure. I tried to turn, steering left, right, anywhere, but the road beneath my tires didn't respond. Or maybe it did. The bend shifted beneath me. Each adjustment brought me back to the same spot, the same endless stretch. And in that moment, a single thought drilled into my skull. I might never leave. The shapes appeared again, along the shoulders, beyond the trees. Shadows mirrored my every movement, faces carved into bark, limbs stretched in impossible angles, eyes following me. They didn't move toward me aggressively, but that wasn't necessary. The air itself carried the weight of their attention. My fear became a pulse, echoing off wet asphalt, bouncing back from the darkened forest. I remembered the missing cars, the abandoned belongings, the families who vanished. They hadn't disappeared from the world. They had disappeared from the road, from the stretch of asphalt that refused to let them leave. And now I understood, in a faint, terrible way, why. The road wasn't merely asphalt. It was awareness. It recorded, claimed, reflected every fear, every heartbeat, every glance. And I had been recorded now, watched, measured, a part of the road itself. The fog rolled in suddenly, thick and suffocating. I could barely see the edge of the asphalt. The forest seemed to lean closer, trunks bending unnaturally, branches stretching toward the car. My headlights picked up movement at the edges, glimpses of forms just beyond comprehension. And I knew that looking away was dangerous. That acknowledgement was participation, that the road, the fog, the shapes, they waited for recognition. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to focus on the path, or what I thought was the path. The air hummed faintly now, a low vibration under my tires, under my chest, under my skull. Not wind, not engine, something else, something alive, patient, indifferent, watching. I passed a set of tracks, wide and deep, cutting across the asphalt at impossible angles. I knew what they were without seeing them fully. The shapes that left them, travelers claimed by the road, something had walked this asphalt or had been dragged across it, leaving evidence that nothing alive should be able to make. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached. The light shifted again. The road ahead split once more, fractured into identical copies of itself. I blinked. My pulse echoed in my ears. And for a brief, impossible moment, I saw myself in the center of every path. 1, 2, 3 infinite versions. All identical, all trapped, and all looking back at me. I tried to turn, to drive in a direction that would break the pattern. But each turn brought me back. The road didn't just loop. It multiplied, folded, claimed. I screamed silently, voice caught in my throat. Tires hummed over asphalt that felt alive, responding to my fear, bending beneath my hands. The fog shifted slightly, and I caught glimpses of shapes closer than before. Shadows pressed into the edges of the road. Faces twisted, elongated, mimicking travelers, mimicking me. They didn't approach. They didn't chase. They simply existed. And in their existence, the road solidified its claim on me. I remembered advice from an old patrol log, a note scribbled in the margin. If you see the road split, don't panic. Don't look away. Just drive. Just survive. I drove. I drove straight, kept my eyes forward, forced my mind to a single point of focus. But the road behind me, the fog beside me, the shapes at the edges, they were patient, indifferent, and persistent. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time became meaningless. The headlights illuminated the same curves, the same dips, the same shadows. The fog thickened and thinned, the trees shifted, the road split again endlessly. And I realized something terrible. Leaving wasn't just about driving. It was about understanding. Accepting that the road claimed more than bodies. It claimed attention, presence, awareness. I gripped the wheel harder, tried to force myself to focus, try to remember what the world outside this road looked like. But the shapes pressed in, the fog pulled tighter, and the road stretched infinitely ahead. And in a faint, unshakable whisper in my mind, I felt it. The road doesn't forget. It doesn't release. Not truly. By the time the first faint light of dawn touched the horizon, the fog had thinned slightly, the shapes retreating into shadow. I was still on the road, still alive, still moving, but I knew I wasn't leaving. Not entirely. A part of me would remain here, watching, waiting, acknowledged, and I would return, whether I wanted to or not, because this road, this infinite, fracturing asphalt, never lets go. I parked at the edge of what might have been a familiar stretch, hands white, shaking, eyes raw from scanning shadows, reflections, shapes. And I knew the road remembered me now. My pulse, my fear, my presence, and somewhere deep in the asphalt and fog, it waited for me to drive again. I had driven the road to nowhere, and the road had driven me to... The call came just after sunset, that pale, fading light that makes everything seem sharper and yet unreal. They said people had been vanishing near the old Harper farm, out past the county line, in the stretch of fields no one goes to anymore. I've been a sheriff long enough to know that when locals speak in whispers, it's because they've seen too much, or they've imagined things their minds refuse to admit. I drove the patrol car along the dirt road, tires crunching over loose gravel, watching the field stretch empty on either side. Tall grass swayed in the wind, moving like waves over dark water. The sun had disappeared behind a low bank of clouds, leaving a gray hush that made everything still, except for the distant crowing of unseen birds. I've driven by this land hundreds of times. I know its curves, its dips, its shadows, but tonight it felt wrong. Heavy, expectant. The farmhouse came into view like a ghost, with bleached gray, shingles missing, the front porch sagging under decades of neglect. Windows boarded, but one on the upper floor was broken, the glass jagged and black against the fading light. The field stretched away, empty and silent, as if nothing had ever moved there. And yet I knew better. I could feel in the air absence, the kind that leaves a mark. I parked the car on the edge of the driveway, boots crunching on gravel, and stepped out. The wind swept across the fields, carrying the scent of damp earth and rot. The door to the farmhouse hung slightly open, swaying in the breeze. I hesitated, called it in on the radio, half expecting an answer, half expecting it to fail. Silence, just static. I swallowed hard, the kind of swallow that leaves your throat dry. The air inside was thick with dust and memory. I pushed the door fully open, and it moaned, the sound stretching, fading into nothing. The floorboards creaked under my weight. Shadows clung to the corners, and the smell of old wood and mildew filled my nose. I didn't call out. I didn't need to. The house seemed to respond to presence alone, aware of intrusion. In the kitchen, dishes lay in broken piles, rusted silverware, a cup with faded paint. A chair toppled on its side, everything frozen in a moment long past. I traced a hand along the counter, careful not to disturb more than necessary. My fingers caught on the rough edges of decay. This place hadn't been touched in decades, maybe longer, and yet the air didn't feel entirely dead. Something lingered here, watching, waiting. I moved through the room slowly, heart hammering. Upstairs, the hall stretched narrow and dark, the boards moaning with every step. Bedrooms lay empty, beds unmade, mattresses sagging. I noticed faint marks on the walls, scratches or etchings, patterns I couldn't immediately name. My mind tried to rationalize, tried to tell me there were children playing, vandals long gone. But the shapes felt deliberate, intentional, not of casual hands, but of something that had watched and waited and wanted to be remembered. The living room held the heaviest weight, a fireplace full of cold ashes, and in the armchair, a coat draped as if someone had just stood, left in a hurry. I reached for it, hesitant, and the air pressed against me, heavy and cold. My pulse rattled in my chest. The coat smelled faintly of earth, of decay, of something else I couldn't name. I recoiled, stepping back. The room felt alive, breathable not with air, but with memory. I remember standing in the doorway, scanning the windows. The fields outside stretched empty, yes, but not entirely. Shadows clung in corners, moving almost imperceptibly, shapes that my mind couldn't fully define. At first, I thought it was the setting sun, the fading light playing tricks. But the longer I stared, the less I believed that. My stomach tightened. I felt watched, not by eyes, not by humans, but by absence. The empty space carried attention. In the pantry, I found something more tangible. A child's shoe, cracked leather, faded by sun or time, wet with dew. A tin cup, dented and rusted, lying as if dropped mid-motion. And a notebook, yellowed, pages curling. I flipped it open carefully. Scribbles, hasty and uneven, entries dated decades ago. Notes about lights in the fields at night. Voices heard where no one should be. Shadows that move without bodies. I ran a thumb over the ink, careful not to smear it. Whoever wrote this saw what I had felt tonight, saw what I had sensed, and the thought sent a shiver down my spine. I went to the back door next, where the field meets the woods. The door hung crooked on its hinges. I pushed it open and stepped onto the threshold. The grass was high, wet, brushing against my knees. Footprints? Possibly. Or maybe impressions left by wind and earth. I couldn't tell. The longer I stood, the more the field seemed to shift, like a wave frozen in motion. Every time I thought I saw the end of it, the horizon moved farther. The farmhouse behind me felt smaller, weaker, like it was a part of the field now, consumed. The wind picked up, whispering, or maybe just the rustle of grass. But it sounded like voices. Names? Calls? I couldn't be sure. My chest tightened. I felt the weight of countless absences pressing in. The missing, the vanished, the forgotten. I had come looking for them, expecting clues, evidence, maybe some explanation. But the house, the fields, the wind, they had none to give. Only the memory of what had been lost. I walked slowly toward the barn at the edge of property. Its door swung loosely on one hinge. I pushed it open, flashlight cutting a thin line of light across the dusty interior. Old farming tools leaned against walls, rotted crates stacked haphazardly. The air was thicker here, mustier, carrying the faint scent of old animals and forgotten lives. And in the corner, half buried under years of dust, a small cot, a mattress, stained, sagging. Something about it made my skin crawl. Something unclaimed. Something waiting. I remember the reports from locals, the whispers about lights, about shapes moving in the fields at night, about people walking out to investigate and never returning. I didn't want to believe it, but standing there, flashlight shaking in my hand, I could feel the weight of those stories pressing down on me. This place didn't forget. It recorded absence. It consumed attention, and I had come willingly. The wind shifted again. Shadows moved along the edges of the barn. Or maybe it was just my mind straining against the silence. I wanted to call it in, wanted to radio the station, but the signal was weak. Static crackled, and then silence. I was alone, not in the usual sense of being by myself, but alone in the sense that the house, the fields, the air itself had claimed me as witness. I had no choice but to see, to feel, to remember. I left the barn and walked back toward the farmhouse. Every step made the grass seem taller, the horizon farther. I glanced at the windows. They were black holes now, Empty, staring. The broken pane on the upper floor caught the last of the sun, reflecting it in shards like eyes. I shivered. The house wasn't abandoned in the way you can leave something behind. It wasn't just empty. It was patient. It had waited decades, keeping track of all that came near. And now it had me. I stepped back to the patrol car at the edge of the driveway. Tires sank slightly into the soft gravel. I looked back once more. The farmhouse stood silent, still unchanging. But I knew the emptiness. There was not nothing. It was presence. It was attention. It was history recorded in decay and dust. I swallowed hard, hand shaking, and got into the car. The engine roared, tires spinning gravel under the wheels. As I drove away, the farmhouse shrank behind me, but not entirely. Something followed me in the mind, in the pulse of my heartbeat, in the way the horizon seemed to stretch endlessly. Absence leaves traces. Shadows leave traces. And this place, it left me marked. I didn't look back again. But the emptiness followed anyway. Through fields, through forests, through every silent corner I passed. And I knew I would return. Not just to investigate, not just for duty, but because this road, these fields, this farmhouse demanded acknowledgement. And acknowledgement once given cannot be forgotten. The night swallowed the farmhouse, the empty fields, the barn, and me. But the memory remained patient, pressing, insistent. And in the quiet on the patrol car, I felt the pull of the house and field still, reaching, waiting, recording. The missing weren't just gone. They were remembered. And now, so was I. I shouldn't have come inside. I knew at the moment my boots touched the wooden porch. The house looked dead from the outside. Peeling paint, sagging roof, shattered windows. But stepping across that threshold, I realized dead wasn't the right word. Empty wasn't either. It was waiting, patient, listening. The air was thick with dust and something else. Something faint, almost imperceptible, like the lingering warmth of someone who had just left, or someone who never left at all. I switched on my flashlight, the beam trembling slightly, and pushed the door fully open. The hinges groaned like they were complaining, like they hadn't moved in decades. But I could feel the motion of the house itself, settling, responding to me. The living room was frozen in time. A chair tipped over. A table still set, plates cracked and yellowed. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, curling toward the floor. And through it all, a sound, a faint noise, almost beneath the threshold of hearing. I stopped, held my breath. The sound came again, a soft whimper, like a child crying far away, or maybe a grown person whispering to themselves. I couldn't tell. I called out. My voice sounded wrong, echoing off the walls in a way that made the house feel larger, older, endless. Hello. No response. Only the faintest echo of the whimper, almost teasing me, almost coaxing me deeper inside. My stomach tightened. I shouldn't have moved forward, but I did. The hallway stretched narrow and dark. Floorboards groaned beneath me. Every step I took felt like an intrusion. The noise followed me, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes so faint I thought I'd imagined it. I remembered the reports, neighbors whispering about voices in the walls, lights flickering, doors opening by themselves. I had scoffed before. I wasn't scoffing anymore. In the kitchen, the smell hit me. Not just old wood, not just mildew, but something damp, organic, faintly sweet, decaying. My flashlight caught a glimpse of movement, or maybe shape. In the corner, a shadow too quick to follow, too purposeful to ignore. I swallowed hard and forced myself to step closer. The whimper came again, louder this time, a soft, ragged rhythm like sobbing held too long. I moved into the next room. The walls seemed closer here, the ceiling lower. My flashlight beam bounced across a broken dresser. A mirror, cracked in long, jagged lines, reflected the room but not me. I frowned, stepping closer. The crying stopped the moment I entered the beam. Silence. Total. I exhaled slowly, trying to convince myself it was the wind, or rats, or memory playing tricks. But my heart told me something else. I pressed onward. Upstairs. The stairs creaked in warning, and for a moment I hesitated. Then I remembered why I was here. The missing people, the neighbors' fear, the abandoned reports and files. If there was even a chance someone or something was alive, I had to see. The upstairs hallway was narrow, though it smelled older here, thicker with decay. My flashlight swept over the doors, all closed, some cracked slightly. Behind one, I heard it again. A soft sound, not quite crying, not quite whispering, more like someone brushing against the wall, moving slowly. My pulse rattled in my ears. I reached for the door handle. Cold metal, sticky with rust. I hesitated. The sound didn't come from one room alone. It was all around me. The walls themselves seemed to hum with life, vibrating faintly, almost imperceptibly. I pushed the door open. Inside was a bedroom, small, frozen in the past. A crib, empty. A dresser, drawers pulled halfway open. And in the corner, the source, or what I thought was the source. A shadow shifting too smoothly, too deliberately to be human. I froze. The whimper rose, closer now, sharper. Not inhuman, not fully, not yet. I stepped closer, flashlight cutting a thin line across the floor. The shadow receded, merging with the walls. I could feel it, though, watching, listening, waiting. My mind raced. Was it someone alive hiding? Or something else entirely? Something tied to this house, to the silence, to the absence of everyone who had come here before me? The crying came again, this time from the floorboards beneath me. Faint, almost like the house itself was producing it. I knelt, hand brushing the wood. Cold, damp, vibrating faintly, almost like a heartbeat. I could feel in my bones. Presence. Something hidden. Something alive. Something patient. I followed the sound. Down the hallway. Into another room. The bedroom here was darker. Walls peeling in long strips. The floor littered with debris. The whimper grew louder. But it wasn't just one voice. A chorus? No, that wasn't right. Variations. Shifts. Some soft, some sharp, some almost human. I stepped closer. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest. My flashlight caught something small and quick in the corner. A figure? Something crouched? Gone the moment I blinked. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. I've been through abandoned houses before. This one was different. It didn't just decay. It remembered every sound, every motion, every heartbeat I brought into it. The house absorbed and amplified. And I realized the crying wasn't just sound. It was memory, echoes of those who had vanished, trapped in the walls, repeating endlessly. The closet door creaked. I spun toward it. Empty. I took a hesitant step forward, and the crying grew sharper, closer. Not behind me, not ahead, all around. I could feel it pressing in the wood, in the air in my chest. I swallowed hard. My pulse thundered. I could almost make out shapes in the shadows. Tiny human forms pressed into the walls. Faces barely visible, mouths opening in silent calls. I wanted to leave. My mind screamed to run. But every instinct in me, trained, drilled, stubborn, told me to see, to witness. I stepped toward the stairs. The crying followed, echoing up and down, twisting with my steps, sometimes behind me, sometimes ahead. The house itself seemed to guide the sound, bending it, shaping it, forcing me to confront it. I remembered the missing people again, their calls unanswered, their trails gone cold. And I realized they hadn't left this house. Not really. They were here, somewhere in the walls, in the floorboards, in the air itself. And the faint noises, the cries behind the walls, were all that remained. A record, a memory, a warning. I pushed myself onward. Each room revealed more. Overturned furniture, toys half buried in dust, clothing left in corners. The crying shifted with me, never stationary, always just beyond understanding. I tried to speak. My voice came out a whisper, swallowed by the air. Hello? Is someone here? The sound echoed back, altered, distorted, faintly mocking. I knew I wasn't alone. Not with someone who could be reasoned with. Not with someone who could answer. Something watched, waiting, patient, indifferent. And in the middle of that quiet, something shifted in the shadows, a slight movement just beyond the beam of my flashlight. Not human, Not entirely. And yet it mirrored me just slightly. My posture, my hesitation, my fear. I took a step back. The crying didn't stop. It swelled, surrounding me, coming from every corner, every crack in the walls. The house wasn't empty. It never had been. It held attention, recorded presence, absorbed memory, and I had walked straight into it. I left the room, descending the stairs slowly, each step echoing in hollow wood. The cries followed me, blending with the wind outside, the settling of the house, the faint creak of floorboards. I tried to make sense of it. Could it be alive? Could someone really have survived here, decades unseen? Or was it something else? Something tied to the memory of all that had happened here. All the disappearances. All the silence? I reached the front door, hand on the knob. The air pressed harder against me, as if the house wanted one last acknowledgement. The cries softened but didn't stop. Faint, patient, insistent. I opened the door, stepping onto the porch. The field stretched silent outside, empty and still. The sun had disappeared entirely, leaving the world gray, quiet. I turned back once. The house loomed dark and still, but I knew the silence was a lie. The cries behind the walls would continue. They would follow the next visitor, record the next presence. And for a long moment, I understood leaving didn't mean escape. Leaving meant carrying the memory. I stepped into the patrol car, heart hammering, pulse echoing in my ears, engine roaring, tires crunching over gravel. The cries faded behind me, replaced by the wind, the empty fields, and the faint hum of the road. But they didn't disappear. Not really. They lingered in my mind, in my chest, in the way the night pressed against my windows. A reminder, a record, a warning. The farmhouse would wait, patient, indifferent, alive in absence. And I would never forget the cries behind the walls. I should have stayed away.